The clock was ticking mercilessly. There were only 10 minutes left before the exam ended when the teacher slammed her fist against the board and demanded that everyone turn in their papers. Panic immediately spread through the back of the classroom. One student was sweating bullets while staring at his completely blank answer sheet. Freaking out, he nudged the guy next to him and demanded to know where the cheat sheet they had planned on was. The answer came in a tense whisper. Their academic survival depended on Lin Tian. The two turned their heads at the same time, only to find complete chaos. The person responsible for bringing the answers was drooling all over the desk in front of him. He was snoring loudly with a peaceful smile on his face, completely unaware of the academic disaster about to unfold. This was Lin Tian, a college student who ignored every social norm. His wardrobe consisted of nothing more than a plain white t-shirt and a worn-out pair of shorts. Zero sense of vanity. His daily life was a strange mix of pride and poverty. In the cafeteria, he devoured his usual meal of plain rice and water as if it were a luxury feast. When the cook, completely baffled, asked how he could order a fifth bowl of that flavorless combo without shame, the young man puffed out his chest. Without the slightest embarrassment, he loudly announced that he was broke, and that was all his wallet could afford. Rumors spread nonstop through the hallways. Other students mocked the guy who couldn't afford a proper meal and carried his belongings in a plastic grocery bag instead of a backpack. Rather than shrinking away from the criticism, he shouted back at the gossipers, proudly calling himself a misunderstood fashion icon ahead of his time. Back in the tense classroom, the miracle of wealth was still nothing more than a distant dream. Wearing his usual white shirt, the sleeping student was violently pulled out of his nap. The teacher woke him up in a fury, stared at the untouched exam on his desk, and delivered her final warning. If he kept sleeping without answering a single question, expulsion would be his future. Finally waking up, Lin Tian rested his face on one hand and calmly reminded the teacher that there were still 10 minutes left in the exam. She responded with a mocking laugh. To her, that amount of time was useless. Raising her voice, she poured out every bit of her prejudice, calling him dead weight for the college and humiliating students who had no money. Tossing the blank paper back onto his desk, she sarcastically told him to stop daydreaming about the answer key falling from the sky outside the window. But the protagonist already had an ace up his sleeve. With a smug smile and his arms crossed, he threw out a challenge. What if the answers really did appear in the clouds right at that very moment? The impossible happened a second later. The deafening sound of helicopter blades filled the classroom. A red helicopter flew across the sky, just outside the window, dragging a giant banner displaying the complete answer key to the English exam. The teacher's arrogance collapsed instantly. She turned pale, completely stunned, and unable to say a single word. The entire class froze as they stared out the window. Without wasting a second, Lin Tian grabbed a pen and started furiously filling in his paper, shouting at his classmates to wake up and do the same. The atmosphere shifted from tension to celebration in an instant. The classroom erupted in excitement, worshipping him as the hero who would guarantee everyone passed. Lin Tian suddenly stood up from his chair. Looking around at the class, he declared that his time there was over and that he had already crushed the exam in just a few minutes. The statement pushed the teacher over the edge. Yelling at the top of her lungs, she ordered the rest of the class to stop copying immediately and threatened Lin Tian with a 0 for such blatant cheating. But the show was far from over. Outside, the helicopter pilot shouted for payment, demanding compensation for the service he had provided. Lin Tian threw open the window and reminded everyone that the bill for the spectacle was still unpaid. Without missing a beat, he pulled out an overstuffed red bag and hurled it through the air toward the helicopter. The bag flew upward, and chaos immediately followed. As the pilot leaned out of the cockpit to catch it, a massive storm of cash burst out. Lin Tian even shouted a warning that the package was heavy. Down on the street below, madness broke out instantly. Students went wild, scrambling to grab the money raining down from the sky. Inside the classroom, the reaction was no different. The students abandoned their exams and crushed themselves against the windows, fighting over the flying bills. The teacher, meanwhile, completely froze. With her eyes wide open and her jaw hanging low, she couldn't say a single word in the face of such a ridiculous scene. Wearing a victorious smile and confident that he had secured a passing grade, Lin Tian turned around and started walking away. Before leaving, he even had the audacity to mock the teacher, telling her to hurry up before she lost her seat on the school bus. As the helicopter sped off into the distance, he walked out of the building, admitting to himself that the stunt had been risky, but it had worked perfectly. A new system notification appeared before his eyes, confirming the successful completion of the beginner mission. Lin Tian rubbed his chin, extremely pleased with the result. He had somehow managed to burn through 150,000 yuan in cash during an exam. Looking at himself in a mirror, the young man reflected on how dramatically his life had changed ever since the Kanan Jin system appeared exactly 1 week earlier. 7 days before, his life had been unbelievably boring. He was stuck in an endless bank line, yawning and complaining about the wait. In his hands was a transparent plastic bag containing a few bills. It was his entire monthly paycheck, a sum so depressing it could make someone cry. He didn't even bother hiding the money, convinced that no criminal would ever waste their time stealing such a pathetic amount. The bad luck struck immediately. A thunderous gunshot echoed through the lobby, and armed robbers stormed into the bank, ordering everyone to get on the floor. Lin Tian turned pale on the spot, cursing himself for jinxing the situation. Under the robbers' guns, panic spread throughout the building. Customers cried and curled up helplessly. The protagonist followed orders and lowered his head, but he kept watching everything around him. Spotting an opportunity, he tried to discreetly hide his bag of cash. The attempt failed. The leader of the robbers noticed the movement, marched over, and pressed the barrel of his gun against the young man's head, demanding to know what he was doing. Wide-eyed with fear and completely frozen, Lin Tian blurted out the first excuse that came to mind, shouting that he had only moved because his back was itching like crazy. Lin Tian refused to lose even a single cent of his hard-earned money. To him, those 200 yuan were a fortune. His golden opportunity arrived when a loud, dramatic scream suddenly drew the attention of both the gang leader and the rest of the hostages. With a sharp look in his eyes, the young man noticed that everyone was distracted and quietly began crawling toward the exit. The commotion was being caused by one of the robbers, a red-headed guy named Mouse, who had grabbed a woman with glasses by the arm. The hostage fought back fiercely, shouting that she'd rather die than put up with the nerve of a scumbag like him. Completely irritated, the gang leader demanded to know why his partner was causing trouble in the middle of a robbery, but the subordinate tried to defend himself by complimenting the woman's looks. Meanwhile, Lin Tian reached the emergency exit button. The door slid open, and his escape route was ready, but he suddenly froze. The redhead lunged at the woman again, making her scream in terror. The moment Lin Tian got a clear look at her face, he recognized the hostage. It was Chen, one of his college professors. He decided to step in, demanding that the criminal let her go, but he couldn't resist being sarcastic. If the robbers wanted to rob somebody, he suggested they should focus on the professor and leave him alone. His boldness didn't last long. The gang leader spotted what was happening, pointed his gun straight at the young man, and roared in anger, demanding to know how he had managed to open the emergency exit. Lin Tian took a step forward and suggested they settle things with a friendly conversation, but the response came in the form of a bullet. The boy froze as he saw the reflection of the projectile tearing through the air toward him. The shot landed squarely in his chest, violently throwing his body backward. A blinding white light consumed everything as he felt his life slipping away. Facing certain death, he spotted 2 bills floating through the air, and his stubbornness took over. There was no way he was dying before getting the chance to spend the 200 yuan he had honestly earned. Then, in a fraction of a second, the unexpected happened. A system notification appeared with a survival ultimatum. Burn through 1 million yuan in just 3 minutes or face permanent death. Suddenly, Lin Tian woke up and found himself in the exact same position as before, with the barrel of a gun pressed against his forehead. The shock hit him instantly because the feeling of being shot was still fresh in his mind. Checking the clock, he saw that it was 4:03 p.m. The miracle of time reversal was real, and the countdown to death had already begun. He had exactly 3 minutes to spend a fortune and save his own life. The young man's distracted behavior immediately caught the robber's attention. Growling threats, the criminal shoved the gun even closer and promised to pull the trigger if he kept staring. On the outside, Lin Tian looked calm, but inside, his blood was boiling with hatred for the man who had murdered him just moments ago. With the cold barrel pressed against his temple, the young man stumbled over his words while trying to come up with an excuse. His stuttering pushed the gang leader over the edge. Shouting at the top of his lungs, the robber ordered him to stop wasting time and start talking. Keeping his composure, Lin Tian pointed at the red-headed accomplice and casually mentioned that the guy had dropped some cash and he had only wanted to give him a friendly warning. The redhead looked completely confused, staring at both the hostage and his boss without understanding a single word of the story. Running out of patience, the gang leader ordered Lin Tian to prove the accusation immediately. Walking slowly with his hands behind his head, the young man passed by the terrified professor lying on the floor. Discreetly, he winked at her. At that moment, reality finally hit the woman. The crazy guy challenging armed robbers was actually one of her students. Stopping in front of the red-headed accomplice, Lin Tian simply pointed at the floor. The accusation wasn't a bluff. Several bills were actually slipping out of the robber's pants and falling onto the ground. The betrayal was right there in plain sight. The subordinate had been stealing from his own gang behind their backs. The leader exploded with rage at his traitorous partner. Taking advantage of the chaos, the student poured gasoline on the fire, mocking the ridiculous strategy of stuffing cash into your pants when bags existed for a reason. Still dripping with sarcasm, he even offered to fetch a suitcase for the robber's little stash. Desperate and feeling the noose tightening around his neck, the redhead started shouting that it was all a setup and that the money wasn't his. But the poison had already spread. The rest of the gang was staring at him with growing suspicion. With the criminals distracted by their own argument, the young man backed away toward the professor. Wearing a calm smile, he declared to the gang that he was just a helpful citizen, extending a hand to help the woman off the floor. He finished his act by sarcastically commenting that the redhead definitely wasn't as dumb as he looked. Adding even more fuel to the fire, Lin Tian loudly announced that the woman beside him was actually the accomplice who had helped the robber hide the stolen money. The professor's eyes widened in total confusion. Without the criminals noticing, the young man pressed lightly against her back and squeezed her hand, whispering for her to simply play along while he worked out an escape route. At that exact moment, the mysterious system stepped in. A thick stack of cash suddenly appeared in the student's hand. Pointing the money directly at the masked leader's face, he shouted that the hostage had no choice but to hide the cash for that guy. The entire gang froze in shock. The leader, the redhead, and the rest of the crew stared at each other in complete disbelief. Faced with physical evidence that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere, the accomplice broke into a cold sweat. He trembled from head to toe while desperately trying to come up with an excuse that refused to leave his throat. His hesitation was all it took. The leader erupted. Shouting furiously, the boss accused his own crew of trying to cheat him and pocket extra money from the robbery. The subordinate desperately tried to swear his loyalty, hurt by the lack of trust, but the leader was done listening. Pointing his gun at his own men, he sarcastically demanded to know whether the money had just fallen out of the sky. With his arms crossed and a grin full of mockery, Lin Tian decided to make things even messier by pretending to take the side of the accomplices. He questioned whether the big boss had also been careless with his own pockets and pointed directly at another pile of cash that had suddenly appeared at the leader's feet. The moment the redhead saw the money on the floor, he immediately fired back, shouting that El Jiaoping had dirty hands too. The mistake was fatal. Hearing his real name exposed in front of the hostages pushed the leader past his breaking point. Blinded by rage, the boss released the safety on his weapon, ready to gun down his own accomplice right then and there. Chaos exploded inside the bank. Suspicion turned into a full-blown bloodbath as the robbers started unloading their weapons on each other. The hostages huddled on the floor, trembling in terror, while the first gangster dropped after taking multiple bullets. The gunfire was non-stop. With bullets whizzing in every direction, Lin Tian threw himself over Professor Chen, using his own body as a shield to protect her. When the smoke finally cleared, the damage was obvious. Most of the gang was already finished. The shootout was over, but for the protagonist, the pressure was far from gone. The system's countdown had only seconds remaining, and he still needed to burn through another 100,000 yuan. To make matters worse, the gang leader was still standing. Boiling with rage, the boss pointed his gun directly at the student's forehead and declared that he was responsible for the massacre and would pay with his life. Fear instantly paralyzed the young man. Seeing her student facing certain death, Professor Chen acted on pure instinct. Refusing to watch him get executed by a criminal, she screamed and threw herself into the line of fire, shielding him with her own body. The gunshot echoed through the bank. The bullet barely grazed the frame of her glasses. Believing this was her heroic final moment, and determined to fulfill her role as a teacher until her last breath, she simply closed her eyes and prepared for death while the other customers screamed in horror. But tragedy never came. Even the shooter stared at the scene in shock, realizing something had gone horribly wrong with the execution. Bracing for the worst, Professor Chen slowly opened her eyes. She felt around her body, and reality finally hit. There was no pain, no wound. The miraculous shot hadn't killed her. Professor Chen searched herself for blood, but what she found was far stranger. A thick shield made entirely of bundles of cash that had appeared out of nowhere had absorbed the bullet's impact. She could barely breathe as she stared at the impossible barrier protecting her. The gang leader completely lost it as well. Unable to understand what kind of sorcery he was witnessing, Lu Hing screamed that it was impossible and prepared to slaughter the remaining hostages once and for all. The counterattack came instantly. The very moment he pulled the trigger, the gun exploded into pieces, sending fragments directly into the criminal's face. The gang leader collapsed, clutching his eyes and screaming in agony. Lin Tian pretended to be just as surprised as everyone else. He put on an innocent expression and started lecturing the room about the power of karma, but inside he was celebrating. He had used the system to materialize stacks of bills directly inside the gun's mechanism, forcing it to jam and self-destruct. With the danger finally gone, Professor Chen noticed how close her student was and immediately turned bright red. Embarrassed beyond words, she ordered him to back away. The young man let out an awkward laugh and played dumb, insisting that the hug had just been a reflex caused by the situation. As he stepped back, he tried grabbing the floating bundles of money he had created, but the fortune vanished into thin air before he could touch it. Lesson learned. The system was strict and wasn't about to let him keep any mission funds. The final act arrived with the thunderous crash of the main doors being forced open. A police officer leading a heavily armed tactical team stormed into the bank lobby. What the officers found was unbelievable. The robbers completely wiped out on the floor, and right in the center of the chaos stood Lin Tian and Professor Chen, calmly staring back at them. The leader of the operation hesitated after seeing the battlefield and immediately demanded answers about the massacre. Having no patience for questioning, Lin Tian let out a deep sigh, placed a hand on the officer's shoulder, and casually called her Auntie. He assured her that the newly graduated officer could handle everything herself because he needed to get to work. The problem started when he turned around to leave. A trail of cash began slipping out of his back pocket, instantly triggering every alarm in the officer's head. Convinced she was dealing with a looter, she shouted for him to freeze where he stood. Her anger came from two things: the suspicious pile of money and the fact that he had just called her old when she had only recently graduated from the police academy. Eventually, the dust settled and normal life returned to the university campus. During Professor Chen's next class, the scene looked like a replay of the exam. Lin Tian completely ignored whatever was written on the board and slept peacefully at his desk with a content smile on his face. The professor marched over to drag him out of dreamland. Nearby, one of his classmates spun a pen between his fingers while making fun of Lin Tian's legendary laziness. When the protagonist finally opened his eyes with a completely clueless expression, Professor Chen's patience evaporated. Raising her voice, she demanded that he focus on the lesson and stop fooling around. Rubbing the back of his neck with an awkward grin, the student claimed that working the previous night had exhausted him and knocked him out. The classmate watched the confrontation like it was front-row entertainment, eager to see how severe the punishment would be, but no punishment came. Professor Chen's mind froze completely. The memories of the shootout and the miracle she had witnessed at the bank still haunted her. The image of Lin Tian throwing himself into the line of fire to protect her flashed through her mind. Her face instantly heated up. Turning away abruptly, she announced that she would make an exception and forgive his nap because of his heroics the day before. Lin Tian barely registered what she said. In her rush to leave, the professor accidentally snagged part of her outfit on the corner of a desk, but the young man didn't even notice. The rest of the classroom was boiling with jealousy. Nobody could accept the fact that the guy slept through class and still got away with it. Amid the chatter, one student's phone began vibrating on the desk. The screen displayed a breaking news story about a mysterious college student who had turned a group of bank robbers into complete fools the previous day. The moment the bell rang and class ended, the students surrounded Lin Tian like a wall. One of the girls casually sat on top of his desk and asked whether the stories online about the robbery were actually true. The protagonist enthusiastically confirmed everything, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. That was when a red-haired student wearing a yellow shirt stepped forward and made a declaration. Since Lin Tian was now officially a celebrity, he was obligated to treat the entire class to a huge feast. Another classmate immediately backed him up, insisting that his star status depended on providing a free dinner. The girl sitting on the desk joined in as well, supporting the pressure without hesitation. The hero's response was immediate and silent. The next second, the students blinked and found nothing but an empty chair. Lin Tian had already dropped to the floor and was quietly crawling toward the exit, determined not to spend a single cent of his own money on that crowd of freeloaders. The bell rang, breaking the mood. Trying to sneak away unnoticed, the boy suddenly froze with a look of pure panic, desperate to escape the pressure. Seeing the scene, a smug redhead burst out laughing, mocking the cowardly escape attempt and asking the class whether a hopeless bum like him still deserved to be called the university's celebrity. Silence filled the room until a firm hand landed on one student's shoulder. Annoyed and frowning, the young man turned around angrily, only to find the protagonist himself standing there with a huge grin on his face. The escape plan had been canceled. At the top of his lungs, Lin Tian invited the entire class to a feast on his dime. The destination for the grand celebration was the university cafeteria. Behind the sudden generosity was a simple and convenient reason. A new system mission had popped up at the perfect moment, providing exactly the money he needed to fund the party without hurting his wallet. Holding up his trusty plastic grocery bag like a trophy, he called everyone over to the cafeteria. The well-dressed redhead nearly exploded with outrage at the cheap proposal. Seeing the rich kid's disgusted reaction, the rest of the guys burst into laughter, nearly doubling over from the absurdity of the situation. Completely unfazed by the mockery, the hero puffed out his chest and repeated the invitation, enthusiastically waving for everyone to follow him. The girls bought into the idea immediately and surrounded him, excited by the chance to get a free meal, even knowing that cafeteria food was far from fine dining. Boiling with jealousy, the redhead shot daggers at the protagonist, unable to believe that he was winning points with the girls by offering nothing more than a cheap lunch. Ignoring the resentment, Lin Tian simply turned around and led the way. Before leaving, he delivered one final blow to his rival's pride. He suggested that the rich kid stop whining and admit he was afraid of embarrassing himself. The taunt landed perfectly. The classroom emptied within seconds as the entire class followed the hero toward the cafeteria. Left behind were only the furious young Master Yang and his loyal followers. Completely oblivious to the danger, one of the lackeys asked whether Yang was really going to back down and accept charity from his enemy. The answer came in the form of a hard kick. Foaming with anger, the leader ordered his crew to march straight to the cafeteria entrance. He had only one goal: crush Lin Tian's pride and humiliate him in front of the entire university. A short distance away, the area outside the cafeteria looked like an anthill. Students packed the place while rumors spread like wildfire. The gossip of the day sounded ridiculous. The poorest guy on campus hadn't just invited his own class, he had supposedly promised to pay for meals for every student at the university. Everyone agreed that his 15 minutes of fame had completely gone to his head. Then Yang's counterattack arrived like a wrecking ball. A massive chef wearing the badge of the luxurious and outrageously expensive Jang Ho restaurant pushed through the crowd while shouting for everyone to move aside. Bringing a mobile gourmet kitchen with him, Yang made a dramatic entrance and loudly announced that he would be providing a real banquet for everyone. The move worked perfectly. As his followers advertised the 5-star luxury experience, the crowd went wild, mesmerized by the spectacle of high-end cuisine appearing right in the middle of campus. The rich kid's elite culinary team worked at full speed, completely overshadowing the university's cheap cafeteria food. Taking full advantage of the audience, Yang's supporters praised their leader's generosity and didn't miss a chance to publicly humiliate Lin Tian. Pointing straight at him, they declared that he was nothing more than a beggar pretending to be a billionaire. To make the insult worse, the red-headed rival flashed a thumbs down with a smug grin. The girls' stomachs started winning the battle. Tired of waiting and starving, several of them were already planning to leave and find real food somewhere else before coming back later. Remaining completely calm, the protagonist let out a sigh, flashed a relaxed smile, and assured everyone that there was no need to waste money elsewhere. At that exact moment, he answered a phone call. On the other end, a voice apologized for the delay in preparing and delivering the banquet. Yang watched the call with an amused smile, but his arrogance disappeared in an instant. The rich kid and his followers suddenly looked up with wide eyes. The entire campus froze in confusion. Out of nowhere, gigantic red containers began falling from the sky, descending toward the courtyard beneath huge parachutes. The madness escalated immediately afterward. A blonde woman with a sword hanging from her waist came dropping through the clouds while gripping 2 chefs by the collars. The moment they landed, she casually detached her skydiving gear, while one of the chefs adjusted his perfectly clean white hat, as if this kind of entrance was completely normal. The massive metal container slammed into the ground with tremendous force. The blonde woman and the 2 chefs stood proudly before the stunned crowd. When the heavy doors finally opened, the mystery was revealed. Inside was a luxury-grade mobile facility packed with shelves of premium ingredients, top-tier beverages, and industrial freezers. The crowd erupted with excitement at the sight of a banquet that had literally fallen from the sky. Not wanting to miss the opportunity to suck up to his boss, one of Yang's followers immediately started praising him at the top of his lungs, encouraging everyone to line up and taste the greatest food in the world. He was convinced that Yang had secretly arranged everything. The truth was that the redhead was just as confused as everyone else. He hadn't lifted a finger to make any of it happen, but his arrogance got the better of him. Assuming that the extravagant setup was a gift from his younger brother, he immediately stole all the credit. Puffing out his chest, He began bragging to the entire university, acting like a business tycoon and declaring that he loved charity, because money meant nothing to him. Full of confidence, Yang walked over to the mysterious blonde woman and extended his hand, introducing himself as the host of the event. The humiliation came instantly. Without even looking at him, the woman slapped his hand away and walked right past him, treating him like he didn't exist. The real boss behind the entire spectacle was someone else. Lin Tian stepped forward and immediately scolded the blonde woman and her team for being late. To speed things up and put pressure on the staff, he casually promised to double everyone's pay on the spot. His authority produced an immediate reaction. The woman bowed respectfully without hesitation. Lowering her head, she apologized for the delay and formally introduced herself as the manager of the luxurious Sicily restaurant. Forcing an awkward smile and scratching the back of his head, the protagonist introduced himself using the childish nickname Xiao Li, leaving the manager visibly uncomfortable with the sudden lack of formality. But the real shock came when he placed his order. While the entire campus expected the owner of such an empire to demand lobster and caviar, Lin Tian simply handed the woman an empty bottle. His request: fill it with plain water and prepare 2 small bowls of the most basic white rice imaginable. Without saying another word, he turned around and walked away, leaving the elite manager frozen in place and completely speechless at such a miserably simple order. The students finally realized the truth. Jiang Hoa wasn't the one who had brought the container. The mystery surrounding Lin Tian's wealth only deepened, and suspicion spread through the crowd that he had been hiding his true social status all along. As they discussed the bizarre situation, everyone headed toward the dining area to sample Lin Tian's food. Consumed by blind rage over the challenge Lin Tian had thrown at him, Jiang Hoa erupted into a storm of insults. The redhead shouted that airdropping ingredients meant nothing because in a kitchen, skill was what truly mattered. As the head chef of a 5-star restaurant, Yang puffed out his chest and proudly boasted that his team consisted of the finest culinary experts in the world. With obvious disdain, he questioned whether Lin Tian's chefs could even be mentioned in the same sentence as his elite professionals. The tension was shattered by an unexpected scene. One of Yang's own chefs completely ignored his employer and rushed toward Lin Tian. The man dropped to his knees and begged through tears to be accepted as an apprentice and taught valuable culinary secrets. Furious, Yang ordered his subordinate to return immediately, threatening to fire him on the spot. The chef didn't even look back. To him, the knowledge standing before his eyes was worth far more than any prestigious position. Lin Tian smirked at the spectacle, cleared his throat, and announced that he was getting hungry. The newly recruited chef immediately assured him that the meal would begin at once and only asked for a moment of patience. Defeated and completely silent, Jiang Ho watched his rival head toward dinner surrounded by the finest culinary talents available. The humiliation was too much for Yang to bear. Taking out his frustration on one of his own allies, he grabbed the man by the shoulders and accused him of being a fake who was trying to worm his way into Lin Tian's good graces. Then he delivered a vicious kick to the man's back, venting all of his bitterness after being outclassed. After receiving one final warning not to cross paths with his rival again, Jiang Ho stood by a window watching everything unfold. Curiosity and contempt battled inside him as he waited to see the first dish prepared by Lin Tian's team. Manager Sicily and her staff took over. Soon, one of the chefs approached Lin Tian and announced that the opening salad was ready. Having little patience for fancy presentations, the young man complained about the wait and casually remarked that he would have preferred a simple bowl of rice. The comment visibly unsettled Sicily, who struggled to understand why someone with access to such luxury seemed completely uninterested in it. Still, she insisted that he try the dish. The plate glowed with a peculiar golden hue. At its center sat a single lettuce leaf drizzled with yellow and pink sauces. Jiang Ho immediately burst into mocking laughter, ridiculing what looked like nothing more than chopped cabbage. One of Lin Tian's classmates, however, was captivated by the presentation and couldn't stop praising it. Lin Tian recognized the flavor but motioned for her to calm down. Displaying quiet pride, Sicily explained the ingredients: white truffles, black truffles, and an exclusive clam paste base. The price? 30,000. After taking a bite, Lin Tian admitted that the food was good. Maybe, he commented casually, a little better than the average university cafeteria meal. The remark shocked everyone present. Neither Jiang Ho nor the guests could understand how he could compare something so expensive and refined to ordinary campus food. While the students stuffed themselves with dishes they had never even heard of, the next surprise arrived at the table. A cabbage soup that appeared simple and ordinary, but secretly contained rare ingredients worth a small fortune. The banquet quickly reached absurd levels. Endangered pork served with white asparagus and saffron appeared next. Even the cafeteria's traditional scrambled eggs had been transformed into a gourmet masterpiece, accompanied by honey-glazed tomatoes and fish roe spheres. The audience was completely stunned. Jang Hoo's prestige was crumbling before their eyes, and everyone now saw Lin Tian as the true master of the situation. On the verge of a breakdown, Yang desperately tried to process whether this kid was actually a hidden millionaire who was about to destroy him. Maintaining her professional composure, Cicely asked whether the banquet had met his expectations. Lin Tian approved of the food but complained that the water wasn't the right temperature. When the manager explained that it came from a snowy mountain spring and then attempted to return some leftover payment, the atmosphere changed instantly. Lin Tian exploded. He slammed his fist on the table, refused every cent of change, and loudly ordered that the money be spent immediately on the most expensive and unnecessary things available: designer bags, cosmetics, luxury items, pure extravagance. The students watched in awe as he casually threw around money on a level none of them could even imagine. Meanwhile, inside his own head, the protagonist was celebrating. The system mission had finally been completed. The relief was almost comical before being replaced by a bizarre moment of tension. A random reward labeled organ enhancement was about to be granted. Praying that he wouldn't receive something useless, Lin Tian watched as the selection cursor spun before finally stopping on a new ability. The shock hit him instantly. The reality in front of him changed in the blink of an eye. Cicely, who had been serving the table moments earlier, now appeared before him dressed in simple, everyday clothing. A mischievous grin slowly spread across Lin Tian's face. The system enhancement wasn't a mistake. He had just unlocked X-ray vision capable of seeing through any obstacle. The world around him had suddenly become an open book, and he was completely distracted by his new ability. Cicely tried to get his attention, but it was obvious that the young man was mentally somewhere else. Her concern became even more apparent when blood suddenly started dripping from his nose, not because he was injured, but because of the overwhelming sensory overload caused by his discovery, and he didn't feel the slightest bit guilty about it. As Lin Tian solidified his status as the university's biggest celebrity following the cafeteria incident, the law began circling closer. Officer Shou Weiwei still felt that the bank robbery case hadn't been fully explained. Suspicious and intrigued, she approached a group of students who were walking across campus laughing and chatting among themselves. The moment one of the students called her auntie, the police officer exploded in outrage and made it very clear that she was young. The tense atmosphere broke when she noticed something strange: the luxury designer bags the students were carrying. She asked where those came from, since they looked completely out of place on a college campus. The guys answered bluntly. The trend of replacing normal backpacks with luxury handbags had a name now. It was the latest style started by Lin Tian. Shou Weiwei sighed in frustration. To her, it was just another rich kid stunt from a bored student treating the university like his personal playground. She turned away, determined to figure out what that guy was really up to. Shou Weiwei's confusion hit its peak. After the misunderstanding with her sister, she could hardly believe it when her target, Lin Tian himself, suddenly appeared right there without her even needing to enter the campus gates. The problem was that he was completely ignoring the world around him. His mind was locked onto the system interface, desperately trying to avoid a punishment for inactivity. Even with students throwing hints and comments at him, Lin Tian kept staring into space, focused on the invisible screen. The officer watched in disbelief. The master Lin, everyone talked about, looked nothing like the poor, hardworking student described in her files. The cheap watch on his wrist and his sloppy appearance only made the contradiction worse. In her mind, the bank robbery had clearly been the turning point that transformed this student into the suddenly wealthy figure he was pretending to be now. Determined, she ordered him to stop, but he ignored her. Lin Tian was too busy trying to pick an easy system mission before things got worse. The exact moment Shou Weiwei reached him and grabbed his shoulder, the jolt made his finger slip on the interface and accidentally confirm a high-difficulty mission. The shock hit both of them at once. "You're finished," the officer snapped, convinced she had cornered him. Lin Tian finally came back to reality and felt the woman's grip on him. He looked up with pure confusion, unable to understand why she had chosen that exact moment to ruin his mission selection. He wasted no time, mumbling vague excuses about how time waits for no one. He tried to walk away from the confrontation, ignoring Shou Weiwei's furious shouting. The system had already delivered its ultimatum. He had to buy a car worth at least 2 million yuan and enter a race before 8:08 p.m., or he would lose the ability to speak entirely. With the clock showing 2 a.m., the pressure was crushing. He pushed forward, determined to settle the problem immediately, but fate intervened. The ground gave way beneath him. In a desperate move, Shou Weiwei grabbed his arm, but her unstable heels betrayed her on the wet pavement. They crashed to the ground together, and Lin Tian slammed the back of his head hard against the concrete. Even while lying there, the officer reacted fast. Instead of admitting it was an accident, she accused him of vandalism and assault. Lin Tian, eyes watering from sheer disbelief and frustration, was taken away on charges of disturbing the peace. Inside the interrogation room, the air felt heavy. The long silence was finally broken by Shou Weiwei slamming her fist on the table. She demanded the truth, the confession she believed he was hiding. Lin Tian scratched his head with the exhausted attitude of someone who had stopped caring and repeated that the whole thing was just a massive misunderstanding, something he had already tried to explain. The officer refused to budge. She adjusted the overhead lamp so the harsh white light was aimed directly at his face and declared that they were settling this through endurance. The tense atmosphere was interrupted by the metallic buzz of phones vibrating in pockets. The outside world had not stopped, and an important call had just come in. The situation flipped instantly. An order from above came through the station. Lin Tian was to be released immediately. Cicely appeared like a storm, introduced herself as his lawyer, and took control of the room, ready to challenge anyone who stood in the way. Lin Tian did not hesitate. He escaped that nightmare at once, leaving the women behind while he desperately searched for a solution to the race problem. It was already 6 p.m. Walking through a crosswalk with his mind completely occupied by the countdown, he never saw the bus roaring toward him. The vehicle passed within inches of his clothes. The driver, pale with rage, shouted insults and asked if he had a death wish. Instead of panicking, Lin Tian gave a thumbs up and flashed a bright grin. The driver could only stare in confusion as the guy walked into the tunnel whistling like nothing had happened. That was when the revelation hit him. He did not need a sports car. He needed a bus. And there it was, a hybrid model with plenty of space, more than enough horsepower, precision climate control, and premium leather seats. The rotating mirrors were the final detail that convinced him it met the system's value requirement. Lin Tian did not hesitate. He paid the 2 million yuan on the spot, ignoring all logic, just to seal the contract with the system. The relief was immediate. The punishment threatening to steal his voice was cancelled, and his language abilities were safe. With the pride of someone who had just bought his own personal transport, he declared that his days as a passenger were over. The system confirmed it. The first stage was complete. He was no longer just a student, he was the owner of the road. The euphoria lasted only a moment before reality slammed into him. The second part of the mission was to win a drift race. Panic flooded his face as he stared at the enormous bus. The biggest problem, he did not know how to drive. As he muttered curses at fate, a shadow appeared beside him. It was Cicely, calmly offering to take the wheel. Lin Tian's relief was absolute. He practically dropped to his knees in gratitude, promised her everything under the sun, then immediately straightened up and ordered her into the vehicle because every second mattered. The race scene was already boiling with tension. Arrogant drivers bragged about their engine upgrades, nitrous systems, and custom builds while throwing insults at each other. Jiang Ho was there too, still humiliated by the failure of his luxury banquet, and he became the target of non-stop taunts. Furious, he lashed out physically at anyone who got too close. Then the atmosphere changed completely. The crowd fell silent as a mysterious figure in a black mask arrived. It was Luo Yashan, the legendary racing goddess. She walked straight toward Snowstorm, her flawless white sports car, ignoring all the noise around her. To her, the arguments and boasting were nothing but wasted breath. Attention reached a whole new level. Rumors were spreading that whoever managed to beat Luo Yashan that night would earn the right to see the face hidden beneath her mask. Desperate for redemption, Jiang Ho seized the opportunity and loudly demanded that the race begin. Engines roared across the starting line, all of them ready for battle, completely unaware that a city bus, driven by a restaurant manager and commanded by a desperate college student, was about to join the competition. A flash of yellow cut through the darkness, forcing Jiang Ho to shield his eyes from the glare. The entire track fell silent. There stood Lin Tian, sitting proudly inside his newly purchased bus and announcing his entry into the race. While everyone else showed off high-performance sports cars, the sight was completely ridiculous. Sitting in the passenger seat, Cicely could feel her face burning with embarrassment. Participating in a professional street race inside a bus was definitely not the highlight of her career. Jiang Ho felt like he was on the verge of a breakdown. Every hope of enjoying a peaceful night had once again been shattered by his rival. The bus rolled into position and lined up perfectly alongside the sports cars. With a relaxed smile, Lin Tian looked out the window at the redhead, taunting him without saying a word. The real surprise, however, was parked beside him. Luo Yashan, the legendary racing goddess, was watching Lin Tian with obvious caution. Curious, Lin Tian activated his X-ray vision. The black mask offered no protection. His eyes widened the moment he discovered the identity behind the racing legend. It was Su Sheking, one of the brightest students in his own class. The revelation was shocking. At the university, Su Sheking was practically untouchable. She was admired for her angelic beauty, her incredible tennis skills, and an aura of perfection that left countless guys completely mesmerized. Lin Tian could hardly believe that the sweet-smiling girl with the flawless reputation was secretly living a life that included dangerous underground races. The situation instantly became much more personal. Lin Tian couldn't hide his shock after seeing Su Sheking beneath the mask. When he stared at her through his X-ray vision, the university goddess immediately noticed his behavior and snapped at him, demanding to know what the idiot thought he was doing. Her aggressive tone almost caught him off guard. Then he started laughing. The irony was too good. Seeing such an angelic image hiding that level of arrogance was strangely fascinating. The race organizer raised the flag. The countdown echoed across the track. Engines roared together. The green signal flashed. The asphalt exploded with horsepower. Sports cars launched forward, but among them, Lin Tian's yellow bus charged ahead with reckless confidence, tearing through the night highway. Beside him, Zhang Hou stared at the awkward vehicle with complete contempt, convinced his rival had finally lost his mind. Meanwhile, Lin Tian looked annoyingly relaxed. With his legs crossed and his hands behind his head, he left all the actual driving to Sicily. He completely ignored the redhead, who leaned out his window making obscene gestures and promising to crush him. The bus eventually pulled alongside Snowstorm, noticing that Luo Yashan's car, or rather, Su Sheking's car, was still sitting motionless. Lin Tian stopped beside her. Confused, she explained the reason. Because of a judge's special ruling, she was required to give her opponents a 5-minute head start to avoid accusations that she was abusing her superior driving skills. Still smiling, Lin Tian shut off the engine. Then he calmly announced that he would wait too. Su Sheking stared at him in disbelief and asked whether he seriously intended to throw away his own advantage for no reason. The 500,000 yuan entry fee had already been paid with carefully crafted confidence. Outwardly, Lin Tian looked completely calm. Internally, however, the financial damage hurt. The system had emptied his account and left very little room for further spending. Even so, he confidently issued a challenge, certain that his investment would not be wasted. Still playing the role of Luo Yashan, Su Sheking questioned whether he truly planned to race a completely unmodified bus against professional competitors. His answer was equal parts confidence and mystery, leaving her wondering whether he was really the mediocre student everyone at school believed him to be. With a roar from her engine, she slammed the accelerator and shot forward. Lin Tian maintained his composure and instructed Sicily to follow the plan exactly. The most important step began right then. He pulled an old cell phone from a plastic shopping bag and made a call. The moment someone answered, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. Everything was unfolding exactly as he had predicted. Lin Tian anonymously reported the illegal racing gathering on Mount Luogiahan to the police, effectively painting a giant target on the event. Meanwhile, the race continued at a blistering pace. Driving his black and red machine, Zhang Hou attacked every corner aggressively. He glanced into his rearview mirror and spotted Lin Tian's bus. A cruel sense of satisfaction spread across his face as he imagined his rival already defeated and consumed by frustration. He was already savoring the humiliation he planned to deliver. Then chaos erupted. Zhang Hao's car was instantly taken out of the race. His tires exploded after running over a carefully placed strip of spikes scattered across the road. Shouting in rage, he demanded to know who had sabotaged him. The answer came in the form of flashing police lights emerging from the darkness. Among the officers stood Shou Weiwei, merciless as ever. She wasted no time. Under charges of disturbing public order and illegally modifying a vehicle, Zhang Hao was restrained on the spot. Bound and speechless, he could only watch as the officer declared that she didn't care who he was or what status he held. At the same time, Lin Tian's bus approached. releasing a thick cloud of smoke from its exhaust. Sitting behind the wheel, Cicely noticed the police blockade and nervously asked whether they should find another route. Yawning casually, Lin Tian finally revealed the truth. He was the one who had called the police. The entire purpose had been to block the shortcut and force every racer onto the longer, more difficult route. Horrified, Cicely asked whether he intended to drive straight through a police checkpoint. Lin Tian responded with nothing more than a mysterious smile. The plan worked perfectly. Not only Zhang Hao, but every racer who attempted to use the shortcut ended up caught in the police operation. Lin Tian's yellow bus rolled forward without hesitation and drove directly over the same strip of spikes that had destroyed the sports cars. Shou Weiwei reacted purely on instinct. She jumped aside and squeezed her eyes shut as the massive vehicle brushed past her. The blast of air was powerful enough to tear part of her skirt. Red with embarrassment and fury, she spun around and demanded to know who was responsible. Lin Tian leaned out the passenger side window with complete indifference and casually asked whether she really intended to keep making a scene. Already at her limit, the officer demanded an explanation for his involvement in the illegal race. Lin Tian remained perfectly calm. With a teasing tone, he asked whether she was simply too exhausted to recognize reality. Then he pointed toward a sign and argued that this was merely the last bus operating on its scheduled route. With a smile, he politely requested permission to continue his trip. Shou Weiwei processed the situation for several seconds. The idea that a city bus could actually be competing in an elite street race was so absurd that it somehow sounded believable. In the end, she stepped aside and let him pass. The vehicle continued down the mountain road, but the realization hit the police officer almost immediately. She spotted the flaw in his story. There were no bus routes anywhere on that mountain trail. Furious, with one hand clutching the tear in her skirt and the other pointing toward the horizon, she screamed for him to stop and demanded compensation for her damaged uniform. Meanwhile, inside the vehicle, Cicely was celebrating. They were still in first place and had already completed half the course. Reality, however, was quick to shift. The bus soon caught up to the remaining competitors, including Luo Yashan's snowstorm. Seeing the awkward vehicle pull alongside her, the racer instantly figured out her rival's strategy. Lin Tian had used the police as a weapon to eliminate the competition. Determined not to lose, she slammed the accelerator and pulled away. The sports car's agility on the winding roads left no room for doubt, and Cicely could only watch helplessly as their opponents surged ahead once again. Lin Tian, meanwhile, remained completely unfazed. He adjusted his sunglasses, pulled out his phone, and gave one final order over the line. The cost of success meant nothing to him. The second phase of his plan was already in motion, and he was willing to accept nothing less than victory. Su Sheking's lead seemed untouchable, but the frustration of the other racers was about to change everything. One of the drivers, furious about the police blockade, decided to gamble everything. He activated his nitrous system's so-called tornado mode. Purple sparks erupted from his exhaust pipes, and the blue sports car shot forward like a missile, blasting past Snowstorm. Then, just as he claimed first place, a blinding white light swallowed the highway. The glow was so intense and bizarre that he instantly lost control. The other racers followed. Panic spread through the entire field. Between screams and frantic shouting, the competitors became convinced that an alien invasion was underway. They abandoned their vehicles, dropped to their knees on the asphalt, raised their hands toward the sky, and begged for mercy from what they believed were extraterrestrial beings studying humanity. The truth was far less dramatic. The UFO was actually Lin Tian's yellow bus. Protected by his sunglasses, the protagonist watched the pathetic spectacle through the passenger side window. With icy calm, he corrected the terrified Earthlings, explaining that he wasn't an alien visitor at all. When the racers finally looked upward instead of cowering in fear, they discovered the truth. The divine glow came from an array of ridiculously powerful spotlights mounted on the bus. The humiliation was complete. While everyone struggled to process how badly they had embarrassed themselves, Lin Tian pointed toward the defeated racers and gave Cicely the signal. The manager wasted no time. Ready to finish the race once and for all, she took control of the situation while the competitors were still trying to recover what little dignity they had left. Cicely raised her blowgun and fired. A tranquilizer dart struck the nearest racer's neck. The man barely managed a confused expression before collapsing onto the pavement. Within seconds, she cleared the entire road. One by one, the remaining competitors dropped unconscious under her precise shots. securing her master's lead. Watching his rivals lying across the highway, Lin Tian laughed and compared them to the arrogant hare that fell asleep during the race. He gave Cicely an approving nod. Smiling proudly, she credited her flawless needle techniques to the teachings of Detective Queenongi. With no obstacles remaining ahead, Lin Tian's yellow bus continued rolling forward at its steady pace. The real threat, however, was behind them. Inside her white sports car, Snowstorm, Luo Yihan assessed the situation. After putting on her sunglasses, she realized she would have to fight dirty if she wanted to overcome Lin Tian's tricks. Without hesitation, she activated the nitrous boost. Modified with oversized spoilers and additional exhaust outlets, the vehicle roared at full power. The tires screamed against the asphalt, throwing sparks everywhere, while a trail of brilliant purple light followed behind her. She accelerated with everything she had. Meanwhile, inside the bus, Lin Tian remained completely oblivious to the danger. He complained to Cicely about the weak internet signal ruining his livestream and sighed dramatically, bragging that nobody in the race was worthy of challenging him. Then an explosive roar shattered the air. Lin Tian looked out the window in absolute shock. Luo Yihan's white sports car had just launched off the ground. The vehicle soared directly over the roof of his bus in a spectacular overtaking maneuver. The sports car slammed back onto the pavement and cut sharply in front of the yellow bus. Through the tinted window, the driver locked eyes with Lin Tian and slowly dragged her thumb across her throat. The message could not have been clearer. Victory would not belong to him. Impressed despite himself, Lin Tian admitted that her driving skills were extraordinary if she had managed to catch up that way. Another burst of nitrous exploded from the car. The white machine surged ahead, reclaiming first place and leaving the bus behind. Tension filled the cabin. Clearly nervous, Cicely demanded a solution after dropping to second place. Realizing that his original strategy had fallen apart and that defeat was becoming a genuine possibility, Lin Tian was forced to improvise. His new strategy? Psychological warfare. He pulled out a walkie-talkie and instructed his assistant to get it into the rival's car. Working quickly, Cicely tied the radio to a makeshift rope assembled from scraps of cloth and loose cables inside the bus. Leaning out the window, she swung it like a lasso and released it with perfect accuracy. The device bounced across the road and landed neatly in the passenger seat of the race leader's vehicle. A moment later, Lin Tian's mocking voice filled her cabin. In a tone dripping with sarcasm, he asked whether she was tired and suggested that she pull over for a quick nap. Overflowing with anger, the girl grabbed the radio and fired back immediately. She demanded that he disappear from her sight and called him a loser whose only purpose was eating her dust. Keeping his arrogant smile, Lin Tian replied that he would gladly accept the insults. After he crossed the finish line in first place, the statement pushed her to the limit. She launched into a stream of insults, calling him an unbearable lunatic and assuring him that he had absolutely no chance of winning. Without losing his composure, Lin Tian simply returned the challenge. Calmly, he asked whether she was really that certain she could keep him behind her. The tension over the radio reached its peak when Lin Tian casually dropped a bombshell. He called her by her real name, a secret she had guarded more carefully than anything else. The driver's confidence vanished instantly. Cold sweat formed on her forehead. Her voice trembled as she demanded to know how he had discovered her identity beneath the mask. With a sly smile, Lin Tian made it clear that he knew exactly who he was dealing with. Playing his final card, he informed her that her secret could remain safe as long as she showed a little goodwill. Jazin exploded through the radio, furious at the blackmailer's audacity, but she quickly realized she had no way out. The psychological pressure worked perfectly. Completely cornered, she slammed on the brakes, forcing her car to slow down dramatically. With the road finally clear, the old yellow bus rolled across the finish line in triumph. Lin Tian stepped out of the vehicle wearing his racing suit and was immediately greeted by a crowd in absolute frenzy. Hidden among the spectators, Jiasen glared daggers at him, boiling with rage and already plotting revenge for being forced to hand over the victory. But the champion couldn't care less about glory or applause. He had only one priority: getting out of there as quickly as possible so he wouldn't miss the start of his favorite streamer's broadcast. Eyes locked on his phone screen, the protagonist opened the live stream at the exact moment the chat was already exploding with excitement. A mysterious pink-haired girl, who always kept her face out of frame, began the stream by dancing to an upbeat song and encouraging viewers to send donations. Lin Tian was completely mesmerized. blushing with a goofy smile plastered across his face. He couldn't take his eyes off the performance. As he watched his favorite online idol dance, his mind raced with curiosity. More than anything, he wanted to discover the true identity of the girl hiding behind that internet persona. Tian Fei continued her routine for an audience of barely more than 150 viewers. Then disaster struck. Her orange tabby cat suddenly lunged at her with its claws out. Startled, the young woman lost her balance and crashed to the floor, scraping her leg in the process. Instead of sympathy, the internet responded with cruelty. Viewers began leaving in droves, the comment section filled with criticism and insults. After pulling herself back in front of the microphone, Fei apologized for the mistake, visibly shaken. On the other side of the screen, Lin Tian was furious. He waved his arms around and cursed at the haters, outraged by the disrespect being thrown at his favorite content creator. The situation only got worse. The viewer count plunged to a miserable 26 people. To make matters worse, the young woman suddenly became dizzy. The sensation hit so hard that she nearly lost consciousness in her chair. With only 4 viewers left in the stream, the aggressive cat was already preparing for another attack. Watching her suffer, Lin Tian wished with all his heart that he had enough money and influence to turn her into the biggest star on the internet. Then something unbelievable happened. He looked down at his hand and froze. His index finger had begun emitting a brilliant golden glow. Almost instantly, a massive notification exploded across the live stream. The platform system announced that Fei had just received its highest honor, the title of Streaming Queen. Lin Tian stared in shock, trying to understand what kind of anonymous billionaire had spent such an outrageous amount of money to help the girl. The impact was immediate. Her audience skyrocketed from 4 viewers to an unbelievable 2 million concurrent watchers. Overwhelmed with emotion, her face red and tears streaming down her cheeks, the streamer stammered into the microphone while thanking a benefactor registered under the name Tian Lin for the monumental support. The realization hit hard. The moment he heard the username, Lin Tian froze. His phone vibrated. A notification from the platform confirmed his newly acquired noble status inside Tian Fei's stream. The idea that someone so influential was involved still hadn't fully registered in his mind. His confusion was overwhelming. To clear things up, he turned to the system. He needed to understand the reward he had received for winning the race. The interface lit up and revealed a new feature, a gift generation tool that provided unlimited virtual currency. In practice, it was a strange but highly specialized ability. The sleepless night eventually caught up with him. The next morning, Lin Tian dragged himself through the university gates while yawning nonstop. His exhaustion vanished the moment he noticed a female student nearby. She walked with a slight limp and wore a bandage on her thigh in the exact same place where Tian Fei had been injured during the stream. The suspicion came instantly. Could the famous streamer actually be attending the same university? He stared at the girl with long hair and a white dress. When she turned and smiled, he immediately recognized her. Su King, the model student. Disappointment followed just as quickly. Her height and facial features didn't quite match the image he had built of the streamer. Su King, however, seemed unusually happy. She admitted that she had been waiting for him for quite some time. Lin Tian bluntly asked why she would wait for him when they barely knew each other. Clearly uncomfortable, she tried to hide her irritation, the lingering resentment she felt over his threat the previous night, and instead began questioning how he had accomplished all the things he supposedly did. Lin Tian never even heard the question. His attention was instantly stolen by a bright glare shining from the center of the classroom. Pointing directly at the source, he interrupted the silence and demanded to know who was responsible for the strange phenomenon. The light was coming from the top of Jaehao's head. It was so smooth and polished that it reflected the morning sunlight like a lighthouse beacon. The embarrassment was obvious. Laughter spread throughout the room. Jaehao sat perfectly still with his eyes shut and jaw clenched in silent fury. The temperature in the room rose the moment he noticed Lin Tian nearby. Hatred practically radiated from him. His suspicion that Lin Tian had called the police during the race had transformed into absolute certainty. Jaehao jumped to his feet with clenched fists, ready for a confrontation. Before he could move, Lin Tian struck first. With a shout that silenced the entire classroom, he openly admitted that he had been the one who called the police. Then he took things a step further. With a mocking grin, he asked whether Jaehao had enjoyed his night on the swings, hinting at something that instantly shifted everyone's attention. Every eye in the room turned toward Su King. The model student froze. With no way to defend herself, she simply blushed and lowered her head, silently confirming Lin Tian's version of events. in order to protect her own secret involvement in the race. Behind that quiet mask, however, she was absolutely furious. Every destructive impulse she had toward her rival was growing stronger. Meanwhile, Lin Tian remained completely relaxed, leaning back in his chair with his feet resting on the desk. The rumors spread immediately. The most desired girl on campus was now being linked to the intimidating Master Lin. Su King gritted her teeth, consumed by thoughts of revenge. The tension was interrupted by the arrival of the professor. Class was about to begin. As the instructor, a petite woman, stood on her tiptoes to write the day's lesson on the board, Lin Tian watched her carefully. A sudden thought crossed his mind. A knowing smile appeared on his face. The detail went unnoticed by everyone else. Not by Lin Tian. Small clumps of orange fur were stuck to the teacher's white shirt. As his eyes moved downward, he spotted bruises around Miss Chen's ankles, the exact same marks he had seen on Tian Fei after her fall the previous night. He made a subtle gesture, mentally comparing the two women. The question lingered in the air. Could Miss Chen and Tian Fei actually be the same person? Miss Chen turned around and caught the student acting strangely. The moment she noticed him staring, something clicked in Lin Tian's mind. The shock hit instantly. He froze, his face filled with disbelief and astonishment. Irritated by his behavior, the teacher snapped and demanded an explanation. Lin Tian could barely contain his excitement. The untouchable goddess, the streamer he admired so much, was actually his own teacher. Before he could fully process the revelation, the system chimed. A new hell-level mission had been activated. The challenge was simple on paper, but daunting in practice. Gather information on the 3 biggest streamers on the internet within 7 days. The reward remained a mystery, but Lin Tian's priorities shifted immediately. His personal curiosity took a backseat to the system's objective. To confirm Miss Chen's identity, he activated his X-ray vision. His goal was straightforward: find the birthmark that Fei had on her leg. The result was immediate frustration. The teacher was wearing tights beneath her outfit, preventing him from seeing her skin. The limitation of his ability nearly drove him crazy. Noticing his invasive stare, Miss Chen quickly covered her legs with a textbook and sharply demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Lin Tian forced a clueless expression, shrugged, and acted as if he had no idea what she was talking about. Miss Chen was distracted by the shrill ringing of her phone and didn't press further. The moment she saw who was calling, her expression changed completely. Alarmed, she ordered the class to study quietly and warned them there would be a quiz later before rushing out of the room with the phone pressed against her ear. Lin Tian's chest tightened. Watching her run away with tears streaming down her face triggered an immediate memory. It was exactly the same way Tian Fei cried whenever her audience attacked her during live streams. Without hesitation, he jumped to his feet, anger surging through his veins. The system, its missions, and any financial reward suddenly meant nothing. Nobody was going to make his goddess suffer. He followed her from a distance and watched as she reached her motorcycle and sped away. What she didn't know was that she was being watched. Hidden around the corner, a man observed her departure and called an accomplice, confirming that the target was on the move and discussing how much pressure should be applied. Unbeknownst to him, Lin Tian was now tailing the spy, furious that anyone would dare threaten the woman he wanted to protect. At the hospital, Chen's desperation reached its breaking point. She pleaded with the doctor for a solution, promising to find the money for her father's surgery no matter what it took. The doctor removed his glasses and delivered the harsh truth. The previous procedure, which he had personally helped pay for, had failed. This time, there was nothing more they could do. The purple-haired woman broke down completely. While she cried, a notification appeared on her phone. It was a dirty proposal: have dinner with Master Zhou in exchange for 500,000 yuan. The choice was brutal. The money could save her father, but the personal cost was immeasurable. When she finally left the hospital in a daze, the trap snapped shut. Outside, under Lin Tian's watchful eye, she ran directly into the spy and a bald man in an open shirt, the same bald guy from before. The threat hung in the air. Smirking arrogantly, the red-haired thug pressured Miss Chen, using her father's condition as leverage. The moment he reached out and touched her chin, time seemed to freeze. A blur appeared out of nowhere. A devastating punch smashed into the thug's face, launching him backward through a cloud of dust. Miss Chen stood frozen in shock, barely able to process what had happened. Then she saw him. Lin Tian was standing there. With fury burning in his eyes, he intimidated the entire group surrounding his teacher. Without wasting a second, he grabbed her hand and pulled her away from danger. Loud enough for everyone to hear, he declared that she belonged to nobody but him. Miss Chen's face immediately turned crimson, torn between shock and utter confusion. The bald man exploded with rage and demanded an explanation. He waved around a supposed contract, claiming that Miss Chen had signed documents binding her to his company and requiring her to pay a massive penalty fee for breaking the agreement. Before he could even state the amount, Lin Tian silenced him with a slap that was both precise and merciless. Shaking his hand from the impact, Lin Tian told him to shut his mouth. Missing a tooth and blinded by rage, the man staggered to his feet and pulled out a knife. He ordered his men to kill Lin Tian on the spot. At that moment, a hulking thug wearing a thick gold chain snatched the blade from the redhead, eager to deliver the finishing blow himself. The giant charged forward, knife in hand, mocking Lin Tian's confidence in the face of cold steel. Completely unfazed, the protagonist smirked and pointed behind them. "You've got this all wrong," he said. The thug spun around in panic, expecting an ambush. There was nobody there, only a single leaf drifting lazily through the air. The distraction lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Lin Tian grabbed Miss Chen and took off running. By the time the thugs realized they'd been fooled, he was already sprinting away with her toward a yellow bus parked nearby. The redhead and the bald man, blinded by fury, chased after them and stormed onto the vehicle, determined to finish the job. Inside, the scene was surreal. Lin Tian sat calmly in a seat, casually whistling while keeping the girl protected in his arms. "It looks like you guys have no idea where you're walking into," he said while watching the intruders. Miss Chen, furious at his audacity and convinced he was bluffing about owning the bus, immediately started protesting. She never got the chance to finish. Cecilia appeared out of nowhere and drove a devastating knee into the first thug, knocking him out cold. The second man froze when he saw the blonde woman charging toward him, but it was already too late. Another perfectly timed strike dropped him instantly. With swift, efficient movements, Cecilia took down both men and left them unconscious on the sidewalk. The bus doors slammed shut with a thunderous bang. Triumphant, Lin Tian opened the window and shouted down at the unconscious thugs, once again confirming that the bus really did belong to him. The yellow bus pulled away, leaving the two attackers behind to suffer both defeat and humiliation. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was painfully awkward. Still sitting on her student's lap, Miss Chen desperately tried to hide her red face and asked if she could please get off. Lin Tian laughed nervously, pretended he had forgotten she was there, and finally let her go, doing his best to look innocent despite nobody buying the act. Miss Chen, however, wasn't in the mood for jokes. Crushed by the weight of the contract penalty hanging over her head, she insisted that she needed to apologize to her bosses. Lin Tian cut her off with shocking confidence. From now on, she would answer only to him. The system immediately confirmed the mission's progress. The first of the 3 tapes had been secured. The reaction was instant. Miss Chen grabbed his ear and twisted it, scolding him for saying such ridiculous things and reminding him that she was still his teacher. Meanwhile, Lin Tian struggled and failed to hide the fact that he wanted to pull her into another hug. The bus came to a stop. Lin Tian got off with her and left her at the bus stop, saying goodbye with a casualness that completely caught her off guard. Chen stood frozen, watching the vehicle disappear into the distance while confronting a truth she desperately wanted to deny. Her feelings for her own student were beginning to consume her. Their final destination, however, demanded a more serious attitude. The yellow bus rolled to a stop on a remote dirt road surrounded by rusted metal barrels. Cecilia sat behind the wheel, visibly tense. Keeping his focus, Lin Tian asked if this was the place. She nodded. Still, a question lingered in the air. Would they need backup for what was about to happen? Lin Tian's smile was pure poison. He didn't need backup. He needed a plan. Cecilia tapped a black briefcase beside her, signaling that all the necessary equipment was ready. Lin Tian stepped off the bus carrying the long case and shot Cecilia a sharp glance. Was she still afraid? Or would the weapon change everything? The entrance was blocked by a wall of muscle. The thugs growled, asking whether the kid was lost or looking for an early funeral. Lin Tian didn't even bother answering. He walked right past them with such indifference that it made them boil with rage. Inside, the building resembled a cavernous warehouse. Vast emptiness stretched in every direction, ending with a single lonely chair at the far end. The silence was broken by a rough voice demanding that he stop playing games. The chair slowly turned. A man in a white suit sat there smoking a cigarette. A vicious scar ran across his face. He wanted to know why Lin Tian had kidnapped his star streamer, Tian Fei Fei. Lin Tian didn't blink. He admitted it without hesitation, dismissing any threats of punishment or legal consequences. The boss finally lost his patience and exploded into a screaming tirade. Lin Tian kept walking forward. Every step narrowed the distance and chipped away at the man's confidence. Far too late, the man in the white suit realized this wasn't empty bravado. Lin Tian reached into his pocket. The guards surged forward immediately, ready to tear him apart the moment a firearm appeared. The atmosphere grew heavy. Fear filled the room. Then Lin Tian revealed what was in his pocket, a simple key, attached to a childish pig-shaped keychain. The sheer absurdity of the sight left everyone frozen in total confusion. The silence inside the warehouse became razor-sharp. Still wearing that mysterious smile, Lin Tian inserted the key into the metal case and twisted. The lid popped open. Inside was the red grip of something that looked very much like a gun. Panic exploded instantly. The boss and every one of his bodyguards practically collapsed, convinced death had arrived. Taking advantage of the chaos, Cecilia launched herself into the crowd. Moving with superhuman speed, she carved through the mob with a relentless series of strikes, dropping giant men like rag dolls. Meanwhile, Lin Tian advanced. His finger rested on the trigger of the red pistol as he aimed directly at the boss's sweaty face. At the top of his lungs, he demanded that the old man stop harassing his woman. The company owner couldn't understand how a kid could be this fearless. Cornered and trembling, he covered his face and waited for the end. The trigger was pulled. Click. The sound echoed throughout the warehouse, but no bullet came. Instead, a shower of cash burst from the gun. Money exploded into the air, covering the entire warehouse with flying bills. For a brief moment, the old man felt as though he had entered heaven itself. Then Lin Tian's icy expression dragged him right back to reality. Lin Tian kept firing. Every bill represented another payment toward buying out Tian Fei-Fei's contract. Holding up a photo of the young woman, he declared that their relationship was officially over. The old man stood there stunned, incapable of forming a protest as his authority dissolved into flying paper. Lin Tian tossed the pistol onto the floor. His brow furrowed as he delivered one final warning. That woman's servitude had come to an end. Lin Tian's extravagance knew no limits. Deciding the first pile of cash wasn't enough, he opened the briefcase and pulled out additional magazines. The chaos resumed. 3 money-firing pistols unleashed a financial hurricane throughout the warehouse. One of them was even held in the protagonist's mouth. The boss and his henchmen, who had been ready to kill moments earlier, were now practically swimming through mountains of paper while praising the generosity of Master Lin. Tian Fei-Fei's contract was bought out, terminated, and transferred. Lin Tian turned his back and delivered a final warning. The young woman now belonged to him. Back on the bus, the atmosphere was triumphant. Still processing the absurdity of everything, Cecilia asked whether spending that much money on Miss Chen had really been worth it. Lin Tian smirked. Of course it was. Why waste real money on people arrogant enough to threaten Miss Chen? The truth, however, soon emerged back at the warehouse. Still humiliated, the boss began inspecting the mountain of cash. The discovery hit like a truck. Almost all of it was fake. Only a pitiful handful of genuine bills could be found. The old man's fury erupted instantly. He beat one of his own subordinates simply because the poor fool had handed him the few real notes they managed to recover. The punishment came quickly. As the boss continued raging, the deadly silence in the room was broken by the cold touch of a gun barrel pressing against the back of his head. Lin Tian's game was over. The hunt, however, was only beginning. The icy barrel against the old man's neck sealed his fate. When he carefully turned around, terror flooded every part of his body. Standing behind him was Mrs. Kawung. The once arrogant boss immediately dropped to his knees, sobbing and begging for mercy. His pathetic apology was cut short by the sole of her shoe slamming into his face. The pink-haired woman smiled coldly. Her message was clear. Forgiveness was something he would never receive. Far away, inside the teacher's lounge, the atmosphere was completely different. Miss Chen received an unexpected package. The moment she tore it open, she froze. Inside were the shredded remains of her old streaming contract. Nothing but worthless scraps of paper. Among the fragments sat a single document, a new contract. This one had been issued by Tian Lin's talent agency. The name immediately triggered an alarm in her mind. It was the same username that had dominated the live streaming platform as its undisputed king. She examined the contract carefully, unaware that she was being watched. High above, hidden among the branches of a tree near the university, Cecilia observed everything through a pair of binoculars. Below her, Lin Tian lay on the grass with his hands behind his head and a peaceful expression on his face. Smiling with satisfaction, he asked whether the deal was done. Cecilia confirmed it. Miss Chen had signed. The desperation to pay for her father's surgery, combined with the generous offer, had made her decision inevitable. She had nowhere else to turn. Tian Fei's popularity continued skyrocketing thanks to the flood of gifts she had received. But Lin Tian was growing impatient. The system only allowed him to sign 2 of the 3 biggest streamers, and he wanted the very top. With a tap on his phone, he opened the rankings. The target was obvious: the #1 streamer. He started the live stream with Bilio, the internet sensation who pulled in 14 million live viewers. As he walked back toward the bus, he gave Cicely a direct order: get the contract signed, no matter what it took. The meeting happened shortly afterward. To Linchen's complete surprise, there was no resistance at all. The girl accepted the contract almost instantly, throwing herself into his arms and declaring her absolute trust in his integrity. Embarrassed, Linchen tried to hide his excitement. It all seemed way too easy, but the victory was an illusion. Bilio's sweet demeanor concealed a trap. Under the excuse of celebrating, she offered him a glass of red wine. Riding high on success and unconcerned about losing control, Linchen drained it in a single gulp. At her signal, her assistant, a man in a black suit, slipped into the bus and reached into his pocket to finish the job. The plan fell apart before it could even begin. Before he had a chance to act, the assistant was struck in the neck by a sleeping dart. Bilio's scheme was about to become her own nightmare. Cicely burst into the bus, exposing the setup and declaring that the traitor would have to go through her first. To her horror, the poisoned dart that should have dropped anyone instantly had no effect whatsoever. The old man pulled it from his neck as if it were nothing more than a splinter. Smirking, he removed his jacket and shirt, revealing a body packed with muscle and covered in battle scars. He introduced himself as Maori, a master of Chinese martial arts. Without hesitation, Cicely threw a punch. Maori dodged with effortless grace. She attacked again, but he caught her arm with surgical precision and spun her through a move he casually described as folk dancing. The impact left her dizzy, her vision spinning. Even with her head swimming, she refused to back down. Clenching her fists with the last of her strength, she unleashed a flurry of attacks. Maori danced through every strike, mocking her and ridiculing her speed. The fight ended in an instant when he delivered a precise blow to the side of her neck, knocking her unconscious. As Cicely's body collapsed, the old man calmly pulled out his phone and took a selfie with his defeated opponent. The celebration dinner continued with endless food and constant toasts. Clearly affected by the alcohol, Linchen eventually slumped over the table and drifted into a deep sleep, still holding his wine glass out of pure reflex. Watching him pass out, Bilio's expression filled with satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. With a calculated motion, she reached beneath her clothes, checking whether her accomplice had completed their part of the operation. Lintian appeared completely out of commission, his head hanging over the table while wine dripped onto the wood. Seeing him totally defenseless, Bilio's expression hardened. She climbed onto the table, her face filled with hostility. Her voice turned cold and sharp as she declared that the contract would never be honored. The plan was simple and cruel. Dump Linchen onto public transportation with enough planted evidence to guarantee his immediate arrest. Her victorious laughter echoed through the room as she mocked the grim future waiting for him behind bars. The streamer sitting nearby watched the scene unfold in stunned silence. Then the atmosphere shifted instantly. Linchen, who moments ago looked too drunk to stand, suddenly rose to his feet. His eyes were perfectly clear, showing no sign of intoxication. Bilio froze in shock. The game had completely turned around. Linchen needed no explanation. From the very beginning, his sharp perception had exposed the deception. He had noticed the exact moment she tried to hide the sedative beneath her skirt. Even though his enhanced vision still left him uncomfortable at times, it had revealed everything he needed to know. Smiling confidently, he warned the internet celebrity to be more careful. Then he dropped a question that left her speechless. Who exactly had taken the sleeping drug that night? Confused and shaken, she backed against her chair, staring at the table without an answer. The situation quickly spiraled when she exploded into a barrage of insults. Her nonstop rant about how despicable Linchen was came to an abrupt halt as the sedative she had accidentally consumed finally kicked in. Her words slowed into slurred whispers, and her body began surrendering to sleep. A crafty grin appeared on Linchen's face. Bilio's helpless state created the perfect opportunity for his next move. Even as she struggled to keep her eyes open and weakly demanded to know what he planned to do, he offered no explanation. The situation took a ridiculous turn when he pulled out a plastic bag and started packing up all the food from the table. He tossed the lobsters inside without hesitation, declaring that wasting food was a crime against tradition. He even complained that the dinner had been a failure because he was still hungry. Despite her drowsy state, Billuo exploded in outrage, demanding to know how he could possibly prioritize food over a beautiful woman like her. Genuinely puzzled, Linchin scratched his head and insisted that meals were far more important. His attitude finally pushed her over the edge. She began kicking and flailing, knocking a plate of meatballs onto the floor where it shattered into pieces. The sight of perfectly good food being wasted instantly hardened Linchin's expression. Completely unaffected by her tears or humiliation, Linchin left the restaurant wearing a satisfied smile, carrying bags filled with lobster and the leftover wine. As he stepped outside, his path was blocked by a gray-haired man entering the building. Billuo's assistant passed him silently, shooting him a look full of hatred. Chaos erupted inside moments later when the streamer ran into the newcomer's arms, crying uncontrollably. The old man looked shocked at first, but quickly regained his composure when asked whether the mission had succeeded. With a firm nod, he confirmed that everything was ready. Linchin's tragic fate was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, aboard the bus, Linchin's attention drifted towards Sicily. For perhaps the first time, he noticed a beauty in her that had somehow escaped him before. The peaceful ride didn't last long. Just as Lin Tian was starting to notice a side of Sicily he had never really paid attention to before, the bus screeched to a halt. 3 police cruisers had blocked the road ahead. The doors swung open. Officer at the front, in a commanding tone, shouted that Linchin was the target of a report involving the theft of a large sum of money. The young man, genuinely confused, had no idea what accusation they were talking about. The terror escalated when Sicily, acting quickly, grabbed the sleeve of his shirt and slipped a handgun into his hand. Linchin froze the moment he felt the weight of the metal. Before he could react, the officer noticed the weapon and, completely losing his composure, yelled to his colleagues that the suspect was armed. Terrified and having never touched a gun in his life, Linchin tried to explain himself while dozens of barrels were pointed directly at him. The situation escalated further when a large, arrogant officer gave a direct order: open fire on the suspect. The tension exploded on the pavement when Officer Shou Weiwei stepped between Linchin and the other officers, blocking their line of fire. Amid the chaos, she ordered Officer Yuan to inspect the weapon carefully. Keeping his cool, Linchin raised his arm and pulled the trigger. Instead of bullets, nothing but a harmless stream of water shot out of the pistol. Despite the obvious proof, Yuan was blinded by his desire to arrest the suspect and continued insisting that Linchin was dangerous. Weiwei tried to calm things down, reminding everyone that all escape routes were sealed off. There was no reason for violence. She claimed she was acting solely in the name of justice, with no personal motives involved. Moved by her unexpected defense, Linchin impulsively wrapped her in a hug, affectionately calling her auntie and sister. The officer immediately turned red with embarrassment and demanded that he let go of her at once, reminding him that he was still a suspect. Yuan, however, completely lost his temper. He violently shoved Weiwei to the ground and charged at Linchin alone. The protagonist watched the assault through clenched teeth, feeling his blood boil. With a mocking grin, the officer taunted Linchin about his strange habit of trying to save other people, doubting that anyone there would stand by his side. Linchin refused to take the bait. Dismissing the officer's non-stop chatter, he quickly retreated into a dimly lit alley and ordered whoever was hiding there to reveal themselves. Confused and intrigued, Yuan followed him. As soon as he stepped into the shadows, a small drone came buzzing through the air, its camera pointed directly at the officer's face. Yuan's expression changed instantly when he realized he was being live-streamed. Clearly tense, Officer Yuan lunged at the drone. With a brutal squeeze, he crushed the small device against the pavement, smashing it into pieces. A sinister smile spread across his face as he declared that Linchin's tricks were finally over. Unfazed, Linchin asked whether the officer even knew who Billuo and Tian Fei were, suggesting that they were nothing more than pawns in a much larger game. Ignoring the sarcasm and snatching a gun from one of his own partners, the officer questioned Linchin's obsession with money, bluntly stating that once he was dead, money would be useless to him. Linchin sighed, disappointed by the officer's ignorance regarding the reach of the live stream. While the officer continued gesturing angrily, his wig suddenly fell off, revealing a bald head he didn't even notice. When he raised the gun once more, he was interrupted by a civilian from the crowd who, believing the whole thing was some kind of performance, reached out and touched the barrel to see how realistic it was. The area was packed with Tianfei's fans, who applauded the actor and praised the authenticity of his police uniform. Lynchen smiled at the stunned officer and apologized, joking that with enough money, any performance could become reality. Meanwhile, miles away, Chow Biluo was finally waking up from the sleeping pills. Still boiling with rage, she demanded confirmation from her assistant that the plan against Lynchen had been carried out successfully. The old man smiled confidently, assuring her that under his supervision, the young man was already facing an irreversible fate. Determined to savor her victory, Chow Biluo decided to call Lynchen, eager to hear the desperation in his voice. However, as she reached beneath her skirt, where she always kept her phone, her eyes widened in shock. The device was gone. Chow Biluo's humiliation reached its peak when she realized what had happened. Instead of her sophisticated smartphone, she was holding a childish pink toy phone, decorated with the image of Lynchen's favorite pig. Chaos erupted inside the streamer's mansion as panic took over. Lynchen had not only made a fool out of her, but was now using her own device to run his livestream with Tianfei's support. With a victorious smile, Lynchen looked at the crowd surrounding him. The power of those people was the missing piece he needed. Pulling out a pen and paper, he signed the contract with the confidence of someone who already had victory in the bag. Chow Biluo's name was already listed in the agreement as part of the deal. With another system objective crossed off the list, only one final person remained. Filled with excitement, he turned toward the camera lens. 1.5 million viewers were watching the show, flooding the chat with positive comments, drawn in by the promise of gifts. His reputation as a generous donor boosted his popularity, but the atmosphere changed in an instant. A sharp gunshot rang through the air. Panic swept across the plaza as more shots began to echo. Taking advantage of the confusion, Officer Yuan abandoned any pretense of professionalism and focused on his real target, Lynchen's yellow bus. He was determined to carry out a forced search. Far from showing fear, Lynchen saw the perfect opportunity. With an ironic smile, he stepped into Yuan's path and pretended to panic, begging the officer not to search the vehicle because of the livestream audience. Staying right in his face, Yuan growled that this little game was about to end in complete disaster. The atmosphere grew even heavier when a hard-faced officer lunged at the phone and smashed it on the ground to stop the broadcast. The siege around Lynchen's bus was complete. As the police team searched every corner of the vehicle, the young man calmly approached Yuan and thanked him. The officer, bewildered, couldn't understand the gesture and dismissed it as a pointless last-minute attempt to defend himself. Maintaining his composure, Lynchen informed the officer that destroying the phone had only made his audience even more curious. Spreading his arms wide, he reminded everyone that both the people on the street and the digital audience were witnessing every step of the investigation. Cold sweat ran down Yuan's face, but he held on to his arrogance, convinced that the arrest was only moments away. The final blow would come from the suitcase his subordinates had just brought out of the bus. Certain that it contained the incriminating evidence he had planted, Yuan ordered the luggage opened with premature triumph. The moment the suitcase was unlocked, a blinding light burst from inside, temporarily dazzling everyone present and silencing the team's excitement. When their vision returned, what they saw made the officer's blood boil with rage. There was no money, no jewelry, and no illegal documents. The suitcase contained nothing but stacks of math and English textbooks. Pretending to be embarrassed, Lynchen quietly remarked that maybe he had spent a little too much time studying. Yuan's fury erupted at the collapse of his accusations. He screamed, demanding to know where the money the young man supposedly stole had gone, while the audience, watching everything through the livestream that had never actually stopped, laughed at the authority figure's incompetence. Lynchen scratched the back of his neck, maintaining his innocent act, and calmly asked what stolen money the officer kept talking about. Completely beside himself, Yuan shouted that the cash was hidden somewhere inside the bus and insisted that his men would find it. The young man responded with an icy smile, declaring that the accusation was nothing more than a setup orchestrated by the officer himself. Furious, Yuan cocked his gun and threatened to arrest him for slandering law enforcement. Lynchen stood perfectly still and simply warned that he would not walk away unscathed from this stunt if he didn't lower the weapon. The bald officer, convinced that he alone represented the law, refused to back down. Lynchen merely smiled and revealed that Yuan's protector had just arrived. The officer froze when he turned around. Behind him stood a man in an immaculate suit and dark sunglasses, accompanied by an elite SWAT unit, watching the scene with complete disdain. It was the director of the disciplinary department. Yuan's confidence vanished instantly. Getting straight to the point, the director informed him that the internal report detailing his violations had already been completed and that the investigation into his misconduct would be relentless. The SWAT team moved in and handcuffed the officer, who continued screaming about a robbery that never existed even while being taken into custody. Lynchen watched the scene unfold while surrounded by an energized crowd. As the director reviewed the case details, he asked Shou Wei to confirm whether this was the young man who had been summoned by the prosecutor's office. Trying to remain professional, Wei described exactly the kind of person he was. Ignoring her tone, the director observed that despite appearances, Lynchen seemed to possess a noble heart and a fairly decent character. Wei immediately turned bright red and loudly protested that he was not her boyfriend, but merely a suspect. Uninterested in the argument, the director ended the discussion on the spot, ordering her to stop making excuses and get back to work while he handled the legal procedures. The scene ended with the man quietly departing, leaving behind an outraged Wei and a completely ecstatic Lynchen. The system had officially validated the completion of the mission, and the protagonist, thrilled by the power of controlling resources, was already calculating how to invest the extra capital to boost both his popularity and Tian Fei's. When he checked the rankings of the platform's top streamers, he saw their names shining alongside Cao Bilio's, confirming the mission's success. However, his hopes for an epic reward, specifically an upgrade to his X-ray vision, were quickly crushed. The system only granted him access to the main storyline and a personal storage hard drive. The narrative then shifted to the top floor of a skyscraper in the city center, where a businessman dressed in a dark suit sat alone in his office, suddenly overcome by a sinister sense of foreboding. Back to his daily routine, Lynchen received a direct order from the system: establish a company, expand the team, secure an office, and complete the first transaction. With 2 employees already under his wing, the challenge seemed almost trivial. Laughing confidently, Lynchen declared for anyone willing to listen that becoming the richest man in the world was only a matter of time. His excitement was interrupted by a loud crash as a bottle slammed onto the counter. A customer in tears, desperate to buy a product, dragged Lynchen back to the reality of working the register. Embarrassed, he stammered out apologies, frustrated that despite all the progress he had made with the system, he still had to work a part-time job. The awkward moment didn't last long. A sharp scream suddenly cut through the store. His co-worker had lost her balance, knocking over several bottles of milk before crashing violently onto the floor. The commotion in the dairy aisle immediately drew the manager's attention. He stormed over like a hurricane, showering the red-haired employee with insults and questioning her competence while she tearfully begged for forgiveness. With a cruel smile, he stepped closer and intimidated her with a degrading proposal. If she wanted to avoid being fired, she would have to personally cover the losses from the damaged merchandise, which would drastically reduce her monthly pay. Before ending the spectacle, he ordered her to meet him in his office for a private conversation. Lynchen, who had been observing everything from a distance, didn't escape the manager's wrath either. The man turned on him, threatening to cut his earnings if he kept sticking his nose into matters that didn't concern him. The moment the office door closed behind the manager, Lynchen approached his co-worker. With a gentle gesture, he comforted her, reminding her that as struggling students, supporting one another was the only way forward. Touched by his kindness, the redhead invited him to dinner and proudly showed him a discount coupon. Completely disarmed by her sweetness, Lynchen felt as though he were standing in front of someone who shined like an angel. Reality, however, proved far crueler. The red-haired girl entered the office, prepared to do whatever it took to keep her job. Sitting across from the manager and begging for another chance, she watched as he extended his hand with cold brutality and sealed her fate. Without a shred of hesitation or mercy, he announced her immediate termination. The manager's behavior did not go unnoticed. Realizing the man's malicious intentions, Lynchen didn't hesitate. With a snap of his fingers, he forced the cash register to take on a life of its own. The machine flew through the air, slammed directly into the manager, and knocked him to the floor. Taking advantage of the impact, Lynchen followed up with a perfectly timed blow, delivering the lesson the man deserved. Furious and disoriented, the manager accused him of trying to ruin his career, but the threats only brought a confident smile to Lynchen's face. He didn't even blink when the man declared him fired on the spot. Remaining completely calm, Lynchen fired back with a harsh reality check. He wasn't the one being fired, the manager was, because the store had just changed ownership. Unable to process the idea that a broke college student could be the new owner, the man demanded proof. Perfectly confident in his audacity, Lynchen challenged him to call the shareholders, while the manager, trembling with rage, sought confirmation, Lynchen made sure to escort his co-worker away from any further danger. When he returned to the office, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. After the supposed phone call, the manager seemed to have lost what little sanity he had left. In a violent outburst, he hurled a heavy clock at the young man, who dodged effortlessly, as if he had expected the attack all along. The manager screamed that the shareholders denied any sale had taken place, but Lynchen laughed at the pathetic display and questioned whether that call had been legitimate at all. With calm mockery, he cut through the man's shouting, ready to reveal who was really on the other end of the line, or rather, who the manager actually answered to. Lynchen handed the manager a piece of paper and challenged him to call the number written on it. Boiling with indignation and convinced the young man was bluffing, the manager dialed without hesitation. What he never expected was that the voice answering the call would belong to the very same person standing right in front of him. When Lynchen picked up and introduced himself, the manager froze. The realization hit him like a truck. The manager's fury exploded into complete and utter loss of control. He grabbed a folding chair and raised it like a weapon, screaming promises of revenge against the young man's jokes. Then the unexpected happened. The chair suddenly disintegrated in midair. The shock caused the man's wig to slip off, exposing his bald head in the most ridiculous way imaginable. Lynchen flashed a mocking grin as he revealed his final trump card. He hadn't just purchased the store, he had bought the entire property. Climbing onto the bucket of an excavator, he proudly announced that the site would become the birthplace of TN Company. As the machine lifted him into the air, Lynchen remained completely unfazed, sipping a soda while casually giving the order to begin demolition. The manager watched in devastation as his workplace was reduced to rubble. Amid the dust and destruction, Lynchen's attention shifted to the red-haired woman, who stood frozen in disbelief. The moment he learned she was an architect, he wasted no time. Reaching down from atop the excavator, he extended his hand and made her an offer. Right there among the ruins of the past, he recruited the first talent for his new company. The future of TN Company was beginning to take shape. Professor Chen soon took control of the situation. Holding up her phone, she revealed that she had uncovered the mystery behind the expensive livestream gifts and the hidden identity of the industry's newest wealthy figure. Maintaining his composure, Lynchen didn't deny the evidence. The real shock came moments later when she insisted that he wasn't the owner at all his father was. The protagonist froze, realizing just how mistaken she was. She was completely convinced that he was the heir to a wealthy family fortune, when in reality his life had been defined by severe hardship and poverty. As he packed up his belongings, the professor shifted into mentor mode and adopted a much stricter tone. She pulled up his social practice report card, where Lynchen proudly possessed a grand total of 1 point. Her lecture became a list of misconceptions about his life. She argued that, as a rich kid, he should never have to worry about food, completely unaware that he had recently survived on little more than rice and water. She criticized his shabby clothing without realizing he barely owned enough outfits to rotate through, to the point that years of washing had practically changed their color. Finally, she insisted that someone from such a wealthy family had no need to work. Lynchen found the comment especially ironic, considering he had just fired the manager who had been exploiting him. Professor Chen continued urging him to spend more time on social practice activities to avoid failing. Acting on impulse, Lynchen grabbed her hand and decided to tell the truth. He had just purchased land for a major new project and intended to personally oversee its construction, even if that meant hauling bricks himself. Faced with the revelation and the sudden closeness, Professor Chen blushed and lost much of her usual authority in the face of her students' determination. The professor's shift from criticism to genuine concern caught Lynchen off guard. She wasn't trying to tear him down, she simply wanted to secure his academic future. He nodded and assured her that he would return to work, while her warnings about graduation echoed behind him. What he didn't realize was that Jiang Hao had been lurking nearby the entire time. His longtime rival had overheard every detail regarding Lynchen's academic vulnerability. A sinister smile spread across Jiang Hao's face as a new sabotage plan took shape. Prevent Lynchen from earning the points he needed to graduate at all costs. The offensive began with a phone call. Jiang Hao demanded more money from his father, President Jiang Deng, showing no concern for the pressure the family patriarch was already under. Inside the office, the atmosphere was razor-sharp with tension. Exhausted and visibly strained, Jiang Deng was confronted by a subordinate carrying devastating news. Every one of his financial accounts had been frozen. The president tried to hide his desperation, but the man standing before him was not someone who cared about titles or status. The stranger not only confirmed the asset freeze but also revealed that he knew every one of the president's secrets, including his confidential divorce. Jiang Dang's panic became absolute. Remaining as cold and calculating as a predator, the mysterious man tossed a business card onto the floor. The offer was simple: accept the terms, or watch his empire and his restaurant burn to the ground. The man in the suit walked away, leaving Jiang Dang collapsed over his desk, reaching out with trembling fingers to retrieve the card. The name printed on it gleamed like a death sentence. Back at the construction site, Lin was keeping his promise. Despite the exhausting labor under the blazing sun, he carried bricks with genuine satisfaction, finding the work strangely therapeutic. The routine was interrupted when the architect called everyone to lunch. Workers quickly formed a line, and among them stood Lin, eagerly awaiting his meal. When his turn arrived, Dodo handed him a lunchbox with visible hesitation, worried about potential consequences. Lin tried to reassure her, insisting that everyone on the site should treat each other like family. The peaceful moment didn't last long. Before Lin could even touch his food, a massive man whose muscles seemed ready to burst through his safety gear violently snatched the container from his hands. The bully not only stole the meal but also shot him a threatening look, making it clear he should stay quiet. Acting on instinct, Dodo stepped forward to defend her boss, but the giant silenced her with cruel mockery and took the opportunity to harass her with disgusting suggestions about spending some private time together. Lin anger was immediate. His jaw tightened, and his fist clenched as he prepared to respond. But one of the veteran workers stepped in and firmly grabbed his shoulder. "It's not worth it," the man whispered, urging caution. Stunned, Lin asked why everyone should tolerate such arrogance in silence. The purple-haired veteran, his expression heavy with warning, finally explained the reason for everyone's fear. The brute wasn't just another construction worker. He had a violent history and deep connections to the criminal underworld. The tension escalated further when the aggressor, proudly wearing a yellow hard hat, marched toward the group while openly threatening them. The intimidation only stopped when a notification appeared on his phone. The hatred on his face instantly transformed into panic. Backing away, he warned that he would settle the score later before hurriedly leaving the purple-haired worker completely shocked. The man begged Lin not to provoke the brute, fearing retaliation or the loss of everyone's wages. Lin calmly reassured him that there was nothing to worry about. After all, he was now the site's owner. Leaving his co-worker stunned by the revelation, he quietly followed the aggressor toward a secluded corner of the construction site. Hidden among the shadows, the bully met with someone known as Brother Sean. Their conversation revealed that an operation was already underway, and the thug received direct orders for a specific mission. Concealed nearby, Lin listened carefully to every word. As the seriousness of the threat became clear, a jolt of concern ran through him. Sicily was in the middle of a delicate treatment, and he had no immediate reinforcements available. Meanwhile, back in the yard, the situation for the purple-haired worker was rapidly deteriorating. Surrounded by several thugs, he became the target of non-stop humiliation and beatings while the gang laughed at his weakness. One of the attackers raised a shovel, carefully gauging how much force would be needed to seriously injure the terrified man, who was trembling with fear. The blow never landed. A deafening explosion suddenly ripped through the air. An entire fence came crashing down, and through the cloud of dust emerged Lynch's yellow bus, barreling onto the scene and bringing the beating to an abrupt halt. Staring at the aggressor through the windshield, Lynchian coldly asked whether he wanted to be run over. With a sudden burst of acceleration, the bus lunged forward, just enough to throw the man off balance. He dropped the shovel and collapsed to the ground, terrified of being crushed beneath the vehicle. Lynchian stepped off the bus and slowly approached with his hands in his pockets, stopping directly in front of the worker who had been trying to intimidate him moments earlier. Now drenched in cold sweat, the man attempted to regain his swagger, demanding to know if Lynchian understood who he was and boasting about his supposed authority as a boss. Unimpressed, Lynchian simply picked up the shovel from the ground, ready to act. The standoff was interrupted by a familiar voice. Brother Sean, the same red-haired thug whom Lynchian had humiliated in the past, arrived at the construction site accompanied by a new henchman with an imposing build. Silence fell over the area as the two recognized each other. The mocking expression on Lynchian's face made it clear that this reunion was exactly the kind of opportunity he had been waiting for. Shan, meanwhile, trembled with rage at the sight of the protagonist and demanded to know how he had dared to take control of the construction project. Lynchian ignored the gangster's tantrum and delivered a simple ultimatum: leave immediately before he lost his patience with the shovel. Shan's new bodyguard, an arrogant giant, charged forward shouting and demanding respect for his boss's brother. Then the situation took a bizarre turn. A sharp thud echoed against the giant's hard hat. Spinning around, ready to pulverize whoever had dared strike him, the brute suddenly found his words dying in his throat. Standing before him wasn't a fighter or rival gangster, but a short elderly woman staring at him with the fearless confidence of someone who had absolutely nothing to fear. What had moments ago looked like the beginning of a violent confrontation instantly turned into a comedy. With the authority of a mother who feared neither man nor beast, the old woman grabbed the giant by the ear and repeatedly smacked him across the back with her cane. The hulking thug, who towered over his subordinates and terrorized everyone around him, shrank into himself, dropped to his knees, and began crying like a child while begging his mother for forgiveness. The elderly woman then turned toward Lynchen and thanked him for making sure she arrived at the site in time. According to her, his actions had prevented her son from committing yet another terrible mistake. Maintaining the image of a helpful young man, Lynchian simply smiled and declared that helping others was his greatest calling. The atmosphere changed completely the moment the elderly woman left. Lynchian turned an icy gaze toward Brother Sean, who was already trying to sneak away. Blocking his path, the protagonist demanded the identity of the person funding the sabotage at the construction site. Sean hesitated. Tempted as he was, he claimed that the rules of the underworld forbade betraying a client. Lynchian solved the dilemma efficiently. He pulled out a thick stack of cash and handed it to the red-haired thug. Greed immediately began to outweigh loyalty, but Sean still hesitated because of how dangerous his employer was. Lynchian simply doubled the offer, piling up additional bags filled with money until Sean's resistance completely collapsed. The confession came quickly. Yahello was the mastermind behind the entire operation. Still mesmerized by the fortune now sitting in front of him, Sean listened in stunned silence as Lynchian mocked the criminal underworld, comparing it to a poorly managed service company. In a gesture of fake friendship, Lynchian casually placed a hand on the gangster's shoulder. As he quietly explained the bold plan he intended to execute and revealed the contacts he planned to involve, Sean's face went pale. Whatever Lynchian had in mind was so dangerous and so far beyond normal expectations that even a hardened criminal like Sean was left frozen with fear by the young man's sheer audacity. The reunion with Cao Biluo was equally tense. The streamer loudly rejected Lynchian's proposal, but he met her outrage with cold indifference, reminding her exactly where she stood in the hierarchy. As he continued pressing the issue, the young woman, blushing and visibly trembling, questioned what his demands actually involved. Would she be forced to entertain whatever games his guests wanted to play? Her outrage exploded into a barrage of insults. She called him the most despicable person she had ever met. Lynchian remained disturbingly calm. He merely pointed out the contract violation and reminded her of the astronomical penalties that would follow if she refused. Then he walked out and slammed the door behind him, leaving her standing there with a shoe in her hand, unable to carry out the physical attack she had intended. All she could do was grind her teeth in pure hatred. Blinded by anger, Cao Biluo summoned her assistant, Udalan, and demanded immediate reinforcements. The elderly assistant, fully aware of the risks involved, tried to talk her out of it. He feared the price that Brother Defan Pai would demand in exchange for such a favor. Biluo refused to listen. Kicking her loyal assistant aside dismissively, she ordered him to bring Defan Pai to her within an hour. The deadline was met. Defan Pai appeared before the streamer wearing a calculated smile and admitted that this meeting was something he had wanted for a long time. Biluo regarded him with a mixture of caution and sympathy, recognizing that his reputation always arrived before him like thunder before a storm. Defan Pai simply laughed, masking his cunning behind an almost casual gesture as the dangerous power struggle between them continued to escalate. Cao Biluo complained that her reputation was being destroyed, but before she could fully explain, the man silenced her with a simple gesture. He wanted to see the truth for himself. Activating a peculiar ability, his eyes began glowing with a crimson light as he dove deep into the streamer's psyche. What he found was a catalog of trauma, childhood loneliness, the accident that left her abandoned, and the brutal violence of bullies who had once surrounded her with baseball bats. The memory of the day she finally fought back, grabbing a brick and standing against her attackers, until she found allies revealed the darkest and most hidden side of her character. When the effect ended, Cao Biluo sat frozen in place. Defan Pai calmly exposed every detail: the loss of her parents, life on the streets, and her eventual rise among local gangs. Hearing him reveal secrets she had buried for years left her completely stunned. He smiled with the patience of a predator and made one thing clear: From that moment forward, she owed him. When she asked whether he truly intended to help her, Dafan Pai confirmed it. The target was Linchin. He revealed that requests to eliminate the protagonist were coming from multiple directions, including Jiang Hao himself. By 7 o'clock that evening, the atmosphere at the dinner table was filled with anxiety. Forced by Linchin's orders to host guests, Cao Bilio could barely hide her discomfort. The fear of a humiliating night filled with alcohol and people she despised gnawed at her thoughts. She tried to steady herself, relying on Dafan P's promise of protection as he monitored the situation through a concealed earpiece. "I'm ready," she whispered, preparing for the game to begin. Outside the mansion, the mood was one of conspiracy. Maintaining his usual composed demeanor and immaculate white gloves, Dafan Pai issued a direct order. Jiang Hao was to intercept Linchin and keep him occupied. Even under the authority of the man who now manipulated him, Jiang Hao obediently lowered his head in submission. Adjusting his monocle, Dafan Pai watched the young man with predatory anticipation, eager to uncover the deepest secrets hidden within Linchin's mind. Completely unaware of the trap awaiting him, Linchin approached the entrance of a European-style restaurant while casually whistling a cheerful tune. His encounter with Jiang Hao was almost theatrical. After deliberately bumping into the protagonist, the bald student immediately began making a scene, hurling insults and demanding to know why Linchin thought he had the right to enter such an establishment. Linchin looked at him with pure disdain. Treating the questions as meaningless background noise, he simply attempted to walk past him and continue on his way. Unable to accept being ignored, Jiang Hao shouted for him to stop, pointing out that the restaurant belonged to his family. Remaining perfectly calm, Linchin simply replied that he didn't need any favors, he could just send the bill to him after dinner. Far from calming him down, Linchin's magnanimous attitude pushed Jiang Hao to the peak of his fury. Desperate for attention, he created a massive scene in front of every customer in the restaurant, accusing the protagonist of serious crimes. Puffing out his chest and pointing an accusing finger, he loudly claimed that Linchin was involved in human trafficking, alleging that he was forcing women to entertain visitors against their will. The silence that followed in the lobby was absolute, as everyone turned their attention toward the confrontation that seemed poised to destroy Linchin's reputation. Linchin didn't back down in the face of the slander. With icy composure, he demanded that Jiang Hao provide a single piece of concrete evidence to support his accusations. Still riding the confidence he had gained from Sean's information, the student ignored the warning. Determined to expose what he believed was a trafficking operation, he kicked open the door to the private dining room. The shock was immediate. Instead of a scene of exploitation or corruption, Jiang Hao found a room filled with children. They surrounded Cao Bilio, laughing, playing, and asking her to join their games. The accuser's silence was a confession of defeat. Resting a hand on his classmate's shoulder, Linchin asked whether the sight of that charitable gathering was enough proof of the honesty behind his activities. With no arguments left and thoroughly humiliated by the contrast between his wild accusations and the wholesome reality before him, Jiang Hao quietly withdrew, still muttering empty insults under his breath. Meanwhile, Cao Bilio, surrounded by children who treated her like a real fairy tale princess, simply cried, deeply moved by the purity of the moment Linchin had orchestrated. Outside, Dafan Pai watched everything through his monocle, confused. To him, Linchin no longer appeared to be an ordinary human being, but rather a figure distorted by a strange stream of binary code. Later, while Linchin casually enjoyed a slice of cake, the streamer approached him with her head lowered. Wearing an enigmatic smile, Linchin simply reiterated the true nature of the gathering. It was never an exclusive luxury party, it was a charity event, permanently cementing the public humiliation of those who had tried to tarnish his reputation. Tension lingered in the air. The first official broadcast was scheduled for the following day, and while Linchin was busy reflecting on the challenges of managing his growing business, he was suddenly interrupted. With calculated politeness, Dafan Pai deliberately bumped into him. During the brief contact, the antagonist witnessed something bizarre, a glowing number 11 floating mysteriously above Linchin. The sight instantly sparked an obsession within him to uncover the secret behind it. As Linchin's bus drove away, Dafan Pai and an eager Jiang Hao formulated a new strategy. Instead of attacking the protagonist directly, they would isolate him by targeting everyone around him. The domino effect began at the university. After meeting with Dr. Dan regarding her father's health, Professor Chen watched her hopes collapse when she received discouraging news. The result left her visibly shaken. Not long afterward, another crisis struck at home. Her landlord called, demanding immediate payment of overdue rent or face eviction. The pressure campaign spared no one. Cao Biluo, who had been peacefully relaxing on her couch, also received a phone call. The smile on her face vanished the moment she answered. Cold sweat formed instantly as anxiety took hold. Whatever she heard on the other end of the line was enough to shatter her peace of mind and leave her cornered. The trap constructed by Dafan Pai was tightening, and each of Linchin's allies was being struck directly at their greatest vulnerabilities. After ending the call, Cao Bilio sat frozen, wondering what Linchin's next move would be in the face of the crisis. Meanwhile, the protagonist was living through a nightmare of his own. His office was empty. A deathly silence had replaced the usual activity. Every one of his allies, Dodo, Professor Chen, and even the streamer had vanished without a trace. The completion rate of his system mission was dropping at an alarming pace, pushing him toward the edge of collapse. Relief arrived unexpectedly. His phone vibrated. An urgent notification announced the championship race scheduled for that evening, accompanied by a brand new system mission. Before he could fully process the information, a knock at the door revealed a red-haired man wearing a bright smile, ready for a job interview. Still trying to organize his thoughts, Linchin allowed him inside, momentarily forgetting that he himself had posted the job listing. Hidden in the shadows, Dafan Pai observed the scene while analyzing the protagonist's binary composition. To his dark satisfaction, the glowing number above Linchin had dropped from 11 to 3. According to his calculations, disaster was inevitable. By afternoon, the stage for the final race had been set. The route promised a brutal test of endurance. Leave downtown, reach a checkpoint in the Eastern District, and then return all the way to the city's western outskirts. Linchin took his position at the starting line with unsettling calm, completely unfazed by the scale of the challenge. The organizer raised the tension even higher by announcing that there would be no route restrictions, effectively turning the entire city into a giant racetrack of pure chaos. The organizer's next announcement landed like a death sentence. The prize was membership in the prestigious Divine Heroes Club, but the penalty for losing was merciless. Every loser would be forced to surrender their most treasured possession. Caught off guard by the extreme condition, Linchin looked toward Dafan Pai for support. Pretending to be loyal, the driver promised to do his best, while secretly counting down the moments until Linchin lost his company and revealed the full extent of his downfall. The race began beneath the roar of engines. Luo Yashan's car, driven by the legendary Night Queen herself, exploded off the starting line and immediately claimed first place before a massive audience watching the live stream. Event commentators highlighted Luo Yashan's thirst for revenge after her humiliating defeat against Linchin's mysterious bus in the previous competition. To the spectators, the scene was almost comical. While the elite racers tore across the course at incredible speeds, Linchin's bus crawled along at what seemed like a pathetic pace. Unable to resist, Dafan Pai mocked his boss for the vehicle's sluggish performance. Linchin, completely unbothered, merely blinked and pulled out his phone. His plan was simple: call the police. The expected result never came. Operating behind the scenes, Dafan Pai had anticipated every move in advance and had already blocked the city's communications network. Holding a useless phone, Linchin watched his comeback attempt get sabotaged before it could even begin. The network was down, communications had been intercepted, and for the first time during the race, the protagonist scratched his head as he realized that his driver's trap ran far deeper than he had imagined. Remaining calm, Linchin unveiled his final trump card: super acceleration. He ordered Dafan Pai to divert south, taking a route completely outside the original course. The command left the driver stunned. As the race continued, Luo Yashan, the overwhelming favorite, reached the eastern checkpoint with ease. Zhang Haoe arrived shortly afterward, completely convinced that victory was within his grasp. Triumphantly extending his hand to receive the checkpoint stamp, he was instead greeted by something cold and unexpected resting in his palm: a single snowflake. In the middle of summer, panic erupted. Looking up, Zhang Haoe saw the sky turn white. The deafening roar of engines tore through the air as 3 airplanes flew overhead, dumping massive amounts of artificial snow onto the racecourse. Amid the frozen chaos, Linchin's yellow bus appeared not as a slow-moving clunker, but as a war machine equipped with metal skis, gliding across the icy track as if it had been built for it. While a refreshed and energized Linchin packed snow into a snowball and celebrated how easy it was to accelerate across the ice, disaster struck his opponents. Drivers lost control, spinning out and crashing into poles in a chain reaction of devastating accidents. Standing outside his vehicle and nearly in tears, Zhang Haoe finally had a moment of realization as he watched the aircraft fleet in the distance. The snowfall wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was the technical signature of Linchin's victory. The protagonist watched it all unfold with a triumphant smile, while his driver, Dafan Pai, let out a defeated sigh as he realized his boss's plan had been executed with surgical precision. Defan Pai was completely baffled. How had Linchin dared to divert south? The answer lay in a bold logistical operation prepared the day before. Linchin had burned through suitcases full of cash at the airport to stockpile snow and had hired workers to modify the bus with specialized skis, all carefully orchestrated to activate at the exact right moment. In his arrogance, Defan Pai had attempted to manipulate his boss by suggesting they bribe the race officials, a fake strategy designed solely to trap Linchin in a scandal of corruption and reputational ruin. Dismissing the idea as pathetic, Linchin remained focused on victory and gave the next order: head north. As the yellow bus glided through the artificially created winter landscape, forcing the driver to obey while tension steadily mounted, the event helicopter hovered above the finish line. The announcer reached a state of pure excitement, declaring that the decisive moment of the race had arrived. Then a surprise froze both the audience and the commentator. Luo Yashan's car, driven by the legendary Night Queen, was nowhere near the front. Her knuckles had turned white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. The very idea that Linchin could be competing fairly felt like an insult to her understanding of reality. Yet the sight of the vehicles ahead, pulling farther and farther away, confirmed that defeat was approaching. Linchin's strategy wasn't merely about speed, it was about rewriting the rules of the race in front of everyone's eyes. The competition reached its peak when the Night Queen activated her maximum acceleration system. The commentator confidently assumed she had simply been conserving energy for a final strike. However, the situation changed dramatically when the metallic roar of a train suddenly thundered across the course. Linchin's trap had been executed with flawless precision. Forced to avoid a deadly collision, the racer swerved sharply. The train stopped across the tracks, completely blocking the route and leaving both Luo Yashan and her passenger in stunned disbelief. Still shaken, Luo Yashan watched as Linchin's yellow bus emerged from the chaos with unwavering confidence. Flashing a charming smile and a provocative look, Linchin christened his vehicle Daytime Ice, a direct response to his rival's Night Snow. Then, in a perfectly choreographed maneuver, the bus's wheels detached, and it launched itself onto the railway tracks, crossing the high-speed rail line at the perfect moment as it raced toward the true finish point. To the star racer, it was complete madness and interpretation of the rules bordering on sacrilege. Yet even she had to admit it. Linchin's audacity was spectacular. Determined not to be outdone by a trick, she finally revealed her hidden trump card. Activating Blizzard Transformation, her sports car began transforming before the audience's eyes, preparing for a final showdown where mechanical engineering would be pushed beyond its limits. The transformation happened instantly. Luo Yashan's snowstorm became a sleek and deadly motorcycle, blasting forward at near supersonic speed under a surge of nitro. Behind the wheel, Defan Pai watched his boss with something close to religious fear. Linchin's ability to orchestrate the involvement of a high-speed train seemed to defy human logic itself. Linchin, meanwhile, displayed an oddly melancholic expression, lamenting the lack of a worthy challenge until the roar of the motorcycle echoed through the rearview mirror and brought a spark back to his eyes. Luo Yashan charged forward like a bolt of lightning, shouting promises of victory as the black silhouette of her suit and bike sliced through the wind. Remaining completely calm, Linchin casually complimented her appearance, leaving his driver even more confused by the apparent lack of urgency. "We've already won," the protagonist remarked. The bus continued moving toward the finish at its slow, almost erratic pace. Luo Yashan crossed the finish line beneath a shower of confetti and thunderous cheers from the crowd. The commentator spared no praise while celebrating the Night Queen and her apparent domination of the event. Then the celebration died. Silence swallowed the entire venue. As the racer pointed toward the ghostly yellow bus, still weaving across the track like a turtle, an unsettling sense of emptiness spread through the crowd. Ignoring the official result entirely, Linchin's vehicle continued forward with quiet precision, as though his rival's victory was merely an insignificant detail in a much larger plan that only he could see. The red-haired woman watched in disbelief. To her, it looked as though Linchin simply refused to accept defeat. Then everything changed in an instant. The protagonist suddenly shouted to his men that it was time to collect their payment. Chaos erupted at the finish line. Linchin's subordinates rushed onto the track and ripped away the checkered flag, revealing that the race had never truly ended there in the first place. In desperation, Luo Yashan attempted to jump back onto her motorcycle and race toward the actual finish point, but it was already too late. The victory cries of Linchin's allies, who hoisted him onto their shoulders, confirmed the masterstroke. While the Night Queen struggled to process the humiliation, Defan Pai approached her for a tense conversation. The question hanging in the air was simple. How had Linchin managed to predict every single move? The racer remained cautious, revealing little. She knew that Dafan Pai possessed the number one eye, a mysterious vision capable of uncovering secrets. When asked why he had failed to eliminate the protagonist, the driver merely smiled. There was even a hint of admiration in his expression. The numbers floating within Lynchen's binary code remained an unsolved mystery, one that even his mystical vision could not decipher. The final scene cemented the hero's dominance. Displaying the carefree attitude of someone who had just secured victory, Lynchen congratulated his driver and promised him a bonus at lunch. When the furious Night Queen demanded to know who the hundreds of people crowding the event actually were, he spread his arms wide and flashed a triumphant smile. They weren't spectators. They weren't curious onlookers. Every single one of them already belonged to his company, the Tian Link Company. Lynchen hadn't merely won the race. He had turned the entire event into a demonstration of corporate power. His success was undeniable. The system's mission completion rate finally jumped to 37%. In what appeared to be a generous gesture, he suggested to Xiaolong that the employees who had deserted the company should be rehired. The proposal sounded less like kindness and more like a dangerous test of loyalty. Feeling the weight of his boss's scrutiny, Dafan Pai avoided the trap by questioning the need for a celebration and suggesting they focus on the victory instead. Lynchen simply dismissed the idea of parties with the cold confidence of someone who believed money could solve anything. Then he returned to the yellow bus with a new mission already forming in his mind. As he walked away, his expression hardened. He knew that Xiaolong was one of the most complicated and unstable pieces on the board. Luo Yashan, left behind on the track, was pure fury. The defeat her second in a row drove her to vent her rage on her own motorcycle before swearing revenge. She restored the vehicle to its original form, but the look of defeat in her eyes was nothing more than a disguise for the next stage of her retaliation. Her destination was Cao Bilio's luxurious mansion. Completely lacking in manners, Lynchen walked in without knocking, but what he found inside instantly chilled him to the bone. The residence, once a private sanctuary, was now under the control of the authorities. Shou Waiwei and Cao Bilio were cornered, locked in a heated argument with a police officer. Unwavering and backed by what appeared to be overwhelming evidence, the officer declared that this time the streamer would not escape justice. Lynchen's flawless game had just collided with the reality of the law. The situation inside the mansion was complete chaos. As Lynchen tried to process what he was seeing, a police officer questioned his relationship with the streamer, suggesting that she was involved in a criminal organization. Blinded by anger, Cao Biluo pointed directly at Lynchen and blamed him for all of her troubles, while Shou Waiwei and the streamer turned the living room into a battlefield, trading insults like rivals from an ancient legend. The synchronized shouting became unbearable. Finally, Lynchen stepped in. One authoritative gesture was enough to silence Cao Bilio. Embarrassed under his gaze, she retreated into offended silence. With the situation barely under control, Lynchen asked the officer to explain the facts clearly. The story revealed a bold scam. A streaming platform called Fighting had launched a promotional event offering an absurd recharge bonus 1 yuan would supposedly become 50. The offer attracted massive numbers of users. Disaster struck when the company's executives and moderators vanished along with the viewers' money. With a hint of sarcasm, Lynchen pretended to be shocked, joking that he regretted not taking advantage of such a generous promotion before the collapse. The officer's response was blunt. The money was gone, and Cao Bilio, as one of the platform's most recognizable public figures, had become a primary target of the investigation. The case was no longer a simple clash of egos. It had become a major financial fraud investigation, and everyone involved, including Lynchen, was now under scrutiny. Suspicion intensified when Lynchen pointed out that Cao Biluo was the only executive who had not disappeared. The atmosphere immediately grew heavier. Feeling Lynchen's gaze settle on her, the pink-haired woman visibly recoiled in shock. Tension exploded when she tried to defend herself, raising her voice in a desperate protest. Before she could continue, Lynchen closed the distance and pulled her into a firm embrace. The assurance that he trusted her completely disarmed her at once. The protective gesture affected everyone in the room. Even the officers looked visibly moved. Unable to hold back her emotions, Cao Bilio let tears stream down her face. Lynchen reaffirmed before the authorities that his faith in his team was absolute. Watching him, she clenched her teeth silently, torn between affection and determination. Without hesitation, Lynchen accepted full responsibility for the actions of the executive under investigation. After a long, serious sigh, Shou Waiwei finally chose to show some leniency. Taking into account the protagonist's history of helping others, she issued only a formal warning. Before leaving, however, the officer set a strict deadline, 2 days. After that, a special task force would take over the case. Lynchen accepted the challenge without hesitation, fully confident that he could solve the problem long before then. As the officer prepared to leave, Chao Bilio gently touched Lynchen's hand. The contact caught him off guard. Surprised, he looked toward her. Clearly embarrassed, she thanked him for continuing to support her, even after she had tried to resign. Lynchen responded by placing his hands on her shoulders and reassuring her that she remained the company's best employee and its most important public figure, regardless of the circumstances. A deep blush spread across her face. Closing her eyes, she softly whispered his name with a shy smile. Lynchen froze. For a moment, he found himself trapped in her gaze. Someone cleared their throat near the entrance. It was Cicely. After being absent for a long time, she had returned with a completely different appearance. Her hair was now short, and her physique looked far more athletic than before. With a serious expression, she confirmed that Lynchen's prediction had been correct and that it was finally time to act. Relaxing on the couch, the protagonist smiled in satisfaction. Chao Bilio, visibly embarrassed, attempted to apologize for past incidents involving Cicely's hypnosis techniques. Cicely dismissed the topic with a wave of her hand. The effects of that mental influence were long gone, she explained. Now she served strictly as Lynchen's personal assistant. Wasting no time, the protagonist stood up and lightly patted Cicely on the shoulder, signaling that their priority should be capturing the fugitives. Outside the mansion, Chao Bilio asked whether he had somehow predicted that problems would arise during the live streams of the cockfighting events. Lynchen explained that he had simply followed his instincts. As a precaution, he had stationed people at every major exit point in the city, including airports and train stations. Cicely then delivered the crucial update. Several suspicious individuals had been located. Their primary target was Li Sangshong, a young investor and shareholder in the fighting platform who had fled with a large portion of the money. Lynchen studied the suspect's photograph and requested an update on the search operation. Cicely confirmed that the target would be participating in an online gaming tournament later that very night. The moment he heard about the competition, a smile of absolute confidence spread across Lynchen's face. As he prepared to leave, the protagonist remarked with obvious interest, wondering whether the sheer volume of donations might become the deciding factor in determining the outcome of the matches. Lynchen's ability to navigate complicated situations was unquestionable. When Defan Pai attempted to follow him toward the bus, he was stopped by the protagonist's outstretched arm. In a casual tone, Lynchen dismissed him. He was going home to relax, he said, and Defan Pai's presence wouldn't be necessary. Confused, the red-haired man asked why he couldn't drive his boss. Lynchen's answer was immediate. Cicely was already behind the wheel. Defan Pai should take the opportunity to get some rest. The employee persisted with a fake, flattering smile, swearing absolute loyalty in a desperate effort to remain useful and stay close to his employer. Lynchen noticed the tension hidden beneath that smile. He let out a mocking laugh and slammed the vehicle door directly in the man's face. Before leaving, he ordered his subordinate to prepare a foot soak for his return. The bus pulled away, leaving the red-haired man standing there in defeat. Inside the vehicle, Chao Bilio remained seated, quietly watching the scene unfold with growing suspicion. She seized the opportunity to warn Lynchen about Defan Pai's questionable character. Known by the nickname Dragon, the man had a reputation that inspired little trust. Remaining calm, Lynchen asked whether she was suggesting that the sabotage of the streaming platform was connected to him. Chao Bilio stepped closer and confirmed that those were exactly her suspicions. Lynchen responded with a peaceful smile, revealing that he was already fully aware of everything his employee had been doing. The young woman tried to question why her boss remained inactive despite all the evidence, but Lynchen cut her off with a firm posture. Crossing both his arms and legs, he declared that with his opponent so close, any schemes would ultimately be pointless. The scene shifted to a luxurious apartment. There, Li Sangshong, the wealthy heir of a powerful family and a shareholder in the cockfighting platform, celebrated another string of victories in his favorite online game. Euphoric and blinded by his own ego, he felt untouchable, convinced that no player alive could challenge his dominance. A notification suddenly flashed across his screen. His next opponent appeared to be a complete beginner. Seeing that the challenger, identified as Tian Tian Lin, wasn't even wearing a basic character outfit, Sangshong scoffed and shrugged. Convinced the match would be over in seconds, he furiously clicked his mouse, charging the power of his elite sword to its maximum level. With an arrogant grin, he launched himself into the air and unleashed a devastating attack. The smile vanished instantly. His expression twisted into pure shock as he stared at the monitor. With a perfectly timed maneuver, Lin had neutralized the strike and now stood with his foot planted on Sang Shang's immobilized character. The supposed novice had completely crushed him despite his outrageously expensive equipment. Desperation consumed Sang Shang. He grabbed his head and screamed in frustration before taking his anger out on his keyboard, smashing it to pieces. The realization slowly sank in. How could someone with no visible gear defeat a player wielding the prestigious Golden God equipment set? Snatching up his microphone, he immediately accused the winner of cheating. Lin remained calm. Instead of arguing, he questioned his rival's financial capabilities with a hint of mockery. Then came the revelation. Lin wasn't under-equipped at all. He was using the legendary transparent armor, an item so rare that obtaining it was considered nearly impossible. Cold sweat rolled down Sang Shang's face. Terror took hold. He realized he was facing the kind of fanatic who spared neither effort nor money. Trembling, he reached for his bank card, paralyzed by the possibility of sacrificing what remained of his savings for one last desperate attempt at revenge. Faced with reality, Sang Shang received a straightforward warning from Lin. There was no point continuing. The protagonist's legendary status was simply beyond his reach. But surrender was never an option. The bespectacled young man refused to accept defeat and gave in completely to obsession. Opening the in-game store, he spent 65,000 yuan on an equipment lottery. He confirmed the purchase and bought 100 tickets in a single transaction, wagering everything he had left. Under normal circumstances, the golden equipment he already possessed would have been more than enough. Desperation drove him to seek something greater. The pace became frantic. He hammered away at the keys, trying to force luck onto his side. As failure after failure piled up, the light in his eyes faded. Exhaustion took over his face, yet his unhealthy determination kept him spinning the roulette wheel endlessly. When his body finally reached its limit, Sang Shang collapsed into his chair and cried out in despair, unable to accept the humiliation of defeat. At the peak of his breakdown, a private message notification interrupted him. It was Tien Lin. The message offered to sell him the legendary transparent armor. His first reaction was pure rage. He felt mocked. To him, it looked like a cruel joke from the very person who had defeated him. With wounded pride, he declared that he would rather suffer total failure than accept the item, even if it cost him his reputation. To remove all doubt, Lin sent a voice message. The calm and persuasive tone of the protagonist's voice cut through Sang Shang's anger and finally convinced him to listen. The red-haired girl immediately regained her confidence and found herself tempted by Lin advantageous offer. Meanwhile, Sang Shang reappeared wearing the transparent armor, boasting loudly that he was the greatest player alive. Completely relaxed, the girl leaned back with her hands behind her head and celebrated alongside Cicely and Cao Billio, proudly announcing that she had gotten exactly what she wanted. Cao Billio, however, couldn't hide her frustration. Because of the red-haired girl, the protagonist had supposedly wasted an absurdly valuable and incredibly rare item. Lin merely scratched his head. When the young woman demanded more rare equipment, he flashed a sly smile and revealed something unbelievable. Opening his inventory, he displayed an entire collection of more than 10 identical sets of the supposedly priceless armor. The shock was immediate. The entire group was left speechless. Then Lin ended the debate once and for all. Pulling out a document, he dropped a bombshell. He hadn't simply acquired the item. He had purchased the game development company responsible for creating it. The revelation froze the pink-haired girl in place and even drew an expression of pure astonishment from Cicely, a veteran who understood exactly how much money it would take to acquire a corporation worth millions. Cao Billio started shouting in disbelief. Completely composed, Lin corrected her misunderstanding. He explained that he hadn't spent money at all. He had merely traded one company for another. Hearing that, the girl burst into tears and arrived at a completely incorrect conclusion. She became convinced that he had sacrificed Tien Lin solely to save her. Lin was left speechless. Completely baffled by the logic, he said nothing. Unfortunately, his silence was interpreted as heroic confirmation. The tears vanished instantly. Her face turned bright red. Feeling as though she had stepped into a romance novel, the streamer awkwardly tried to reject him politely, explaining that while she liked him, it still wasn't the right time for them to start a relationship. Lin burst out laughing. Amused by the misunderstanding, he told her to stop talking nonsense. Watching the exchange, Cicely became visibly embarrassed and joked that Lin was a legendary man, but about as subtle and sensitive as a steel beam. The reality check left Cao Billio completely stunned. Still in shock, she demanded an explanation for everything that had just happened. Without losing his composure, Linchin dropped a thick stack of papers onto the table and reminded everyone of the most important rule of the competition. The loser forfeits the prize. Only then did he reveal the real strategy. Linchin had traded several of his smaller companies in exchange for 60% ownership of the company that owned the game. Immediately afterward, he ordered the developers to modify certain functions within the system. Cao Bilio solved the mystery almost instantly. The legendary transparent armor had been a complete fraud. The boss had won the duel using nothing but his own skill. As she explained her theory, Linchin let out a quiet laugh and typed a message on his phone. Sicily got straight to the point and asked whether he had truly ordered the game's data to be altered. The young man nodded. He explained that he had already obtained everything he wanted from Li Sangshong. Now it was time to reward his rival with a special modification to the character's attributes. Hopeful, Caobilio asked if this setup was meant to prove his innocence. Linchin pushed her back with the palm of his hand and cut her off with a shout, making it clear that this had nothing to do with clearing his name. Exhausted by their boss's unpredictable and sarcastic personality, the girls gave up trying to understand him and fell silent, no longer willing to deal with his antics. Suddenly, the protagonist slammed his fist onto the table, stood up, and ordered the three women to change locations. Before leaving, he instructed Kaleo and Sicily on how to extract the complete list of names involved in the conspiracy from Liangshong. The scene shifted dramatically to a packed nightclub overflowing with live music and partying. On stage, a mysterious singer wearing a mask captured the attention of everyone in the crowd. Inside a VIP booth, one of the guests asked young Sang about the new performer, intrigued because he had never seen her perform there before. A green-haired employee praised Boss Shi's taste and mentioned a phenomenal new singer who had recently started performing at the club. Curious about why she always wore a mask, the boss demanded a description of her appearance. The employee explained that she never revealed her face, but assured him that one of the staff had managed to sneak a look and confirmed that the young woman was stunning. Without wasting a second, Boss She stood up and ordered his men to bring the mysterious woman directly to his private suite. As the leader left, three massive bodyguards wearing sunglasses stormed the stage and surrounded the performer. Pretending to be terrified, the singer trembled and questioned what was happening, but the thugs ignored her and forcibly escorted her away without explanation. Inside the private room, the boss appeared wearing a robe, smiling confidently as he moved in to corner the supposed young woman. Behind the mask, however, the figure showed no fear and instead wore a cynical grin. The moment the man reached out to grab her, his victorious expression vanished. He froze, turned pale, and broke into a cold sweat as he realized something was wrong. The deception fell apart instantly. There was no woman at all, just a boy mocking him to his face. Completely stunned, Boss shouted, demanding to know who the intruder was and where the singer had gone. Clearly irritated by the man's arrogance, Linchin shouted back, confronting him directly and sarcastically asking whether his presence alone wasn't enough to settle matters between them. The boss sat frozen on the bed, staring at Linchin in complete confusion. Once he recovered from the shock, he grabbed his radio and screamed for his men, ordering them to storm the room immediately and deal with the lunatic. Within seconds, the door was kicked open and 5 burly enforcers surrounded the protagonist, who remained completely motionless. The boss complained that the kid had ruined his evening and demanded punishment. Linchin then ripped off his disguise wig and announced that the game was over. With a mocking grin, the young man raised his hands and shaped his fingers like guns, openly challenging his opponents. The guards stared in confusion, convinced he had finally lost his mind. Annoyed by the audacity, the boss lost his patience and ordered his men to rush in and eliminate the problem. The first guard charged forward with a punch, but Linchin simply pretended to pull a trigger with his finger and mimicked the sound of a gunshot. To everyone's shock, a real bang echoed through the room, and smoke appeared to rise from the protagonist's hand. The giant froze and collapsed to the floor. Without losing his cynical smile, the young man pointed his finger at the next target and fired again, dropping the second guard instantly. As panic spread among the survivors, Linchin began pretending to wield 2 pistols at once. With quick and deadly movements, he cleared the room, taking down the rest of the boss's guards with seemingly impossible shots coming out of nowhere. Boss Sheish was the only one left. Cornered on the bed and trembling from head to toe, he froze when Linchin pressed 2 fingers directly against his forehead and demanded his full attention. Desperate and on the verge of tears, the man called the protagonist a monster, but swore he would do anything to save his own skin. Across the room, Linchin ignored the drama, glanced out the window, smiled, and gave a thumbs up. The secret behind the deadly shots was finally revealed. Sicily was strategically positioned on top of a neighboring building with a sniper rifle, executing every shot. Nearby, Kaluo watched in amazement and praised her partner's effectiveness, but the sharpshooter downplayed the accomplishment, revealing that she had only used chemical rounds to knock the thugs unconscious with anesthetics. As the two talked, neither realized they were being watched. From the top of another building, the legendary racer Luo Shan monitored everything through binoculars, intrigued by the protagonist's next move. A short time later, the young man managed to gather everyone involved into the same room, including Boss Shay and Lusang Shang. Officer Shouwei took charge of the financial embezzlement case and congratulated Linchin on the excellent capture operation. Sicily and Cao Bilio entered the room, and the streamer made no effort to hide her irritation toward the police officer, who had previously claimed to have no connection to the crime. The investigator pointed out that the situation was complicated. When Cao Bilio angrily questioned why the case still wasn't fully resolved, Shouwei explained the real danger. Those men were merely pawns, and an extremely powerful criminal mastermind was pulling the strings behind everything. Linchin quickly connected the dots and concluded that the same hidden figure was likely responsible for fraud and illegal fundraising schemes across several corporations. Suddenly, the door opened, and Mr. Shou unexpectedly entered the room, applauding the protagonist's intelligence and resourcefulness. Mr. Chow warned that although the upper ranks of law enforcement were paying close attention to the case, the lack of concrete evidence was still preventing progress. The director's nervous demeanor immediately put his daughter, Shou Wei, on high alert. Suddenly, both father and daughter fixed their eyes on the protagonist in a strangely meaningful way. Confused by the pressure, Linchin pointed at his own face and asked why everyone was acting so weird. Embarrassed, the young officer finally told him the truth. The department wanted him to take on a separate, secret investigation to solve the mystery. The idea of turning the young man into an undercover operative horrified Shouwei. With worry written all over her face, she started punching her father in the chest, refusing to let Linchin get involved in such a dangerous mission. The director acknowledged his daughter's obvious concern for the young man, but emphasized that the final decision rested entirely with him. Adopting a serious expression, Linchin adjusted his jacket and agreed that the operation was indeed an extremely dangerous frontline assignment. Mr. Chow sighed heavily, assuming he was about to refuse and preparing to back down. That was when the protagonist broke the tension with an ambitious grin. He announced that if the extra pay was generous enough, he would gladly take the job. The sudden display of greed shocked everyone in the room. Sicily, Cao Bilio, and the officers were left completely speechless by the unexpected reaction. Excited by the positive response, the director burst into laughter and praised the ambition of the younger generation. He handed Linchin a confidential file containing the entire network of connections tied to the suspects and instructed him to study every target carefully. Giving the hero a firm pat on the shoulder, the veteran warned him that the cost of the mission would be high, but the glory waiting at the end would be legendary. Linchin pulled up his hood, turned his back, and left with a firm promise. He never fails a mission. Right after the young man departed, Mr. Chow, completely satisfied, told his daughter that he intended to hire him for future operations, finding the young man absolutely fascinating. Chow Wei immediately turned red and told her father to stop joking around, insisting that there was absolutely nothing going on between the two of them. With Kao Bilio's mess finally resolved 100%, the protagonist shifted his focus to the next target, and this time the stage was his own university campus. While reviewing the police's secret dossier, Linchin discovered that one of the criminals was actually a member of the faculty. Suomie, the highly sought-after art professor, a long-haired blonde man constantly surrounded by female students. The only thing the hero remembered about the suspect was his obvious fixation on the class favorite, Professor Chen. Out in the courtyard, the young woman was even joking around with the instructor as he approached her with a sympathetic tone. Seeing this, the protagonist put on his sunglasses and decided to investigate every corner of the campus. A short while later, Miss Chen appeared in her office with a troubled expression, staring out the window. She couldn't put down her phone, clearly overwhelmed with worry about her father. Her thoughts drifted back to the tense phone call she had received from the doctor, who explained that the patient had been recovering well, but then something completely unexpected happened. The man had simply vanished from the hospital. Shocked, Chen demanded to know how someone who could barely move had disappeared from his hospital bed. The doctor assumed the worst and admitted that the patient had most likely been taken away by force. Panicking, the professor announced that she was heading to the hospital immediately to find out who had broken into her father's room.